sharing my screen, if that's okay.
Yes, please do.
Thank you. Okay. Can everyone see the screen okay? Okay, thank you so much. So good morning again, and thank you so much for this opportunity to share a few thoughts with you. I want to thank the organizing committee and really thank all of you through your organizations and through your individual work for what you do. If you don't hear it again today, let me be the first to say how appreciative I am for the work that you do, not just in this year of tremendous uncertainty, but the work that you do each and every day to empower communities. You can tell from my bio that I am at my core a nerd, a hardcore political nerd who reads 4 newspapers a day, who loves to watch MSNBC and Fox News, maybe just to get my blood pressure going. But I like to know what's going on in our world and our community, because I think it makes me better able to understand the challenges my students face, but also to better understand what my role should be within this community. And so as I was thinking about what I would say this morning, I remembered that just 4 years ago, I was able to speak to this gathering when you were in Mystic. And that meeting took place on the cusp of a very contentious presidential election. And now when we think about where we are 4 years later, what I said then was that we together had to embrace the fierce urgency of now. And so in 2020, that urgency is even greater after another contentious presidential election, after doing the best that we could do to make sense of these dual pandemics that you heard about at the start of the meeting. COVID-19 that has disproportionately taken the lives of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people, alongside the pandemic of racial violence that has taken the lives of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Rayshard Brooks, George Floyd, and countless others. And it's against that backdrop that this country feels incredibly divided. And yet people like you are working every day to build community. Amid that chaos is the need to embrace community. But if we are honest with ourselves, many of us are tired. We are overwhelmed. We are tired of being told that our jobs are essential, yet not being respected and compensated as such. We are overwhelmed by the demands on our time and our temperament. We are frustrated that it took these dual pandemics for others to recognize what you know every day in the work that you do. You know better than anyone that normal was not working for large groups of communities in our country. You understood that the issues that you care about are just as present today as they were before, but suddenly people want to talk about and tell you what is the best thing to do. Am I the only one feeling like this, or do others feel that same sort of sentiment? Thumbs up if you do. Okay. But what do we do with that? What do we do with that sense of frustration? What do we do when we realize that we don't have all the answers, because sometimes we don't even yet know all the questions? Let me give you an example. Last spring, when schools suddenly pivoted from in-person learning to online classes, there was this sort of surprise for some that there were families who don't have access to a laptop or to a computer. They were surprised that there were students who weren't logging on. And instead of taking a step back to ask why, they started promoting these sort of ignorant stereotypes about children not being persistent enough, about families not being engaged enough. And instead of understanding that for many families in our communities, they rely on public libraries for access to computers, for access to tutoring and support. And for many families, they rely on those public spaces as warming centers and cooling centers. So when you take away that access, you have exacerbated the problem even more. And then someone had the bright idea, let's just give every kid a Chromebook. And yet you all know that a Chromebook sounds great, but without access to stable Wi-Fi, that Chromebook becomes little more than a heavy paperweight. And even now, after 15 weeks of teaching my college students, I still hold my breath every day and hope that the Wi-Fi will remain stable as I teach my students and homeschool my daughter and have my husband doing his job in the other room. We don't have all the answers because too many people have not raised the question. And so as I thought about that reality of where we were when we gathered 4 years ago, of where we are as a country now on the cusp of momentous change, not just in the political sphere, but in our communities, the notion that kept coming back to me was this concept of Sankofa. And so the visual, the image of Sankofa is this graceful bird. The bird's feet are planting forward, but its head is looking back. Sankofa is a reminder that in order to move forward together, we have to understand how we got here. Sankofa is a reminder that the past can guide us, it can inspire us, and it can teach us if we are willing to listen. And so when we think about moving from chaos to community and all of the amazing work that you do, we also remember that the past is always prologue, that the importance of community, even amid all the uncertainty, means that we have all been prepared for such a time as this. Not just some of us, but indeed all of us in this time of tremendous economic and political uncertainty. We gather with the realization that no matter who sits in the seat, the challenges that we face will remain. And what are those challenges? To create spaces where our children's success isn't bound by zip code, where our worth isn't defined by whether we were born here or brought here, and where the American dream isn't reserved for those born of privilege. And so today, my challenge to you is deceptively simple: to listen without defense, to speak without pretense, and to gather with purpose and promise. Okay, so in my book, Identity Politics in the United States, I talk about the fact that in the US now, we use the term identity politics in a pejorative way. Identity politics is what other groups do. It's what people who are making these illegitimate claims on our government and on our communities do. It's what we assume happens when people care more about themselves than about their community. And that's why we see this resistance to notions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But what I want us to also think about is that identity is at the core of everything that happens in this country. And what I say in the book is that identity politics is as American as apple pie, the very founding of this country. The idea that our identity should be separate from the British crown is about identity politics. When we think about the fights that we saw over the summer about Columbus statues, and whether removing the statue was viewed as an erasure of Italian heritage and Italian American communities, that is about identity politics. And so in the book, I talk about the fact that identity politics happens all around us as we are defining the boundaries of community, but also charting the course for communities to move forward. Identity politics happens when athletes take a knee or when WNBA players refuse to take the court. It happens on battlefields when brave men and women risk their lives in the cause of democracy and freedom. Identity politics happens in churches in Louisiana and South Carolina, in synagogues and Pittsburgh and Poway, California. When in the face of extreme hate and violence, those communities come together and say, your ignorance will not define us. And so identity politics happens after violence at Sandy Hook, UNC Charlotte, and Virginia Tech, when again, communities come together amid chaos to protect and affirm the very best of their humanity. And so even when the world feels heavy, and the world feels so heavy now, when it seems like there's not a place for us to engage our differences without sacrificing civility, identity politics reminds us that democracy requires a collective investment in moving forward, not just as one community, but as multiple communities committed to the same goal. Now, I also know that democracy in the United States has always been aspirational, that even as Thomas Jefferson penned that phrase, all men are created equal, he did so while enslaving Africans. And so when we recognize that gap between the principle and the promise, it allows us to affirm the beauty and fullness of community without making judgments about which communities have value and which voices within those communities should be heard. What do I mean by that? Well, it's not lost on me that I have the opportunity to speak with you this morning in a format that the framers and founders of this country never could have imagined. Hands up, how many of you spend more hours of your day on this box I call the Brady Bunch Zoom box than you ever could have imagined or wanted to? Maybe I'm the only one who a year ago didn't even really know what Zoom was or Teams or Google. I didn't know any of that kind of stuff. And now my whole day is planned around having these boxes. But beyond the technology, I also know that 50 years ago.
Hi, Lena. Marissa asked me to call you because she said you're having some sort of difficulty or you need assistance with data.
Thank you so much. I also know that 50 years ago, the organizations that call themselves advocates for community may never have created a space for someone like me to be here, a first-generation college graduate, born in the heart of the conservative Bible Belt with an Arabic name. I understand that that form of my identity challenges notions and ways that make it even more important for us to build community together. And yet what I also know is that often when we affirm community, when we talk about our distinctiveness and celebrate our differences, we also have to acknowledge that for far too many people, emphasizing community is viewed as a threat because it challenges the status quo. We also have to understand that acknowledging those painful elements of our collective past sometimes make people so uncomfortable that they say, just stop talking about it. And yet we all know, in the work that you do every day in community, you know that not talking about difference, not talking about struggle doesn't make it go away. And so we also acknowledge that often when people say, just get over the past, what they really mean is just get over your past. How else could we explain people embracing Confederate symbols that reverence for a Southern history and past, while denying the efforts of people in Rhode Island to say, it's time for us to remove the word plantation from the official name of our state. So congratulations, Rhode Island, for getting that done this year. And so what I also know as we think about chaos and community and the need to affirm community is that for far too many people, their allegiance to party and political ideology supersedes their investment in people and community. That even in 2020, when the United States House of Representatives put forth an anti-lynching bill to mirror what had happened in the Senate in the past, There were those who voted against it because they did not want to acknowledge that painful part, not just of our history, but for many people, our current reality, even understanding that there had to be a fourth marker placed in order to honor Emmett Till, a bulletproof marker to honor a 14-year-old child. Because for every effort to recognize that history, to denounce that history of hatred and violence, as you see in the pictures, there were those who decided to attack the marker. And now we hear politicians using the word lynching in a political space and denying the history, the weight of that, not just for African Americans, but for people of Latino descent who were lynched in the Southwest, for 11 Italian Americans who were lynched in New Orleans, for Leo Frank and other Jewish Americans who were lynched in the South for speaking out. The past is always prologue. And so I think then that as we come together to affirm community over chaos, we also have to understand the role that we all play. There's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, you can go alone. But if we want to go far, we must go together. So I am going to ask, I don't have control over the sound. So I'm going to ask that if you want to respond, you unmute yourself or put it into the chat, may work better. When you hear the phrase, the future of American democracy, someone put into the chat, please, what comes to mind when you hear that phrase? Now, I should say, please don't treat me like my students and not respond to my attempt at call and response. So I'll be waiting for the chat button. Thank you so much. Ellen Ganley, thank you so much for being the first out the gate. Okay, thank you. Uncertainty. I wonder who the future is for. Inclusion, optimistic, equity, and hope. Different. People's voices being heard. Hope. Wonderful. So let me ask a second question. Why do you feel that way? So if you have the feeling of shaky ground or of justice or possibilities or skepticism and Gen Z, why? Right? So thank you, Deb Pullen. Gen Z, such an involved generation already working to make a difference. I'm not sure I even understand that anymore. Okay, thank you. Anyone else? What's motivating the feeling that you have about the future of American democracy? American cannot live into its promise without inclusion. It can only get better. Let us pray, right? American youth, agreement, respect. Thank you. Different, the need to change and empower our people. Thank you all. I wish you could transfer this to my students so that they see when I ask a question, they respond. I love it, but we always remain hope as we see here, okay? So here's what I want to say, and Janelle Robinson, you put let's see, Kathleen says a profound sadness, but Janelle says, I'm curious to know who is creating the future of American democracy. Here's the spoiler alert. Here's the answer to the question that will be on tomorrow's exam. In spite of all the talking heads, in spite of all the pundits, all the analysts, people like me who get paid to tell people what I think, all the things I got teased about as a kid, I now get paid to do. So it's why I tell young people it gets better. In spite of all of what the analysts are saying, the future of American democracy is not contingent on either of the two men that you see on that screen. It's not contingent on people in Congress or people in your state houses or in your mayoral seats or first selectman seats. The future of American democracy depends on each and every one of you. It depends on all of us together. What do I mean by that? The future of democracy and of this country hinges on our collective ability to reclaim those cornerstones of American democracy, which are at the same time the cornerstones of American communities. It is on us to build a more just and equitable future for our children and for those who are yet to come. As members working within community action programs and agencies, you hold the unique responsibility and indeed privilege to advocate for community. You have the opportunity to invest in our common humanity. Now, I know that the task is awesome. And I know that there are times when your shoulders feel heavy because you feel that you are carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. And in many ways, you are. And it may seem a bit unfair to say that you who are called into this work and into this profession bear that responsibility. But I will say to you what my Southern Virginia grandmother always said to us, and that is sometimes it is what it is. There's a reason why you are called into this profession. There's a reason why you are called into this commitment to community, because you understand that the work you do isn't about giving voice to the voiceless. I detest that phrase. Folks have voices, communities have voices. Our role is to amplify those voices and to listen to what's being told. No one knows better than a single mother who's trying to figure out, how do I keep food on the table? How do I ensure I can get back and forth to my job, that the kids are taken care of, and that I have a moment for myself? No one understands that better than a person who is in that situation. No one understands the uncertainty and doubt that many people are feeling right now about the vaccine if they live within an undocumented family, because there is fear that if I engage in this medical intervention, perhaps people will have access to my information that down the road they will use against me. You all understand that concern and that tension, and you don't dismiss it as foolish folly. You address it, you empower people, and you work to build those bridges and those networks. It is why I am so profoundly grateful that, again, amidst all that's going on, you have found the time to come together in December on the cusp of a new year in order to address these questions. So, Kelly, how am I on time? I want to be respectful of your time, and I can talk a lot.
So it's 10:08 a.m. So you're doing pretty well.
That's fantastic. That never happens to me. Thank you so much. Just give me a note in the chat if I start to run on. Since you can't physically pull me off the stage, just give me a note and I'll be sure to go from there. Okay. So James Baldwin and his work have been weighing very heavy with me lately. I've been revisiting this. A lot of it has to do with a new book by Eddie Glaude called Begin Again, which explores the work of James Baldwin. And Baldwin says, I love America more than any other country in the world. And exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually. Baldwin understood that criticizing this country that we love doesn't make us unpatriotic. Instead, it makes us committed and engaged. Because as so many of you mentioned in the chat, we see what is possible and what needs to be done in order to get there together. That is the power of community that was needed in Baldwin's time and is certainly needed today. And so you heard in my bio that I wear a lot of hats and a lot of titles, but the one that is most important to me is the title of mother. And I see my neighbor, Valencia Goodrich, in the frame, and she knows how much I value that title of being mom to this 12-year-old girl who challenges us each and every day. And part of the joy of being able to be her mom and to be able to talk about what's going on in the world, in the community, in a way that children understand better than any other, is that it allows me to bring together these passions and joys of service and learning. And so 5 years ago, we took her to Selma, Alabama, and you can see the images there because I was asked to write this national report on the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And so we were then asked to come to Selma to present the report during the 50th anniversary of not just the Voting Rights Act of 1965, but also the Bloody Sunday March that happened in Selma, Alabama. Now imagine she's 7 years old at the time, and we have her in the stifling Alabama heat for hours because we had to arrive 3 hours early in order to clear through Secret Service. And so as we are there, the gentleman that you see to my left with his arm raised is a person who is revered as a foot soldier, who on that bridge in Selma in 1965 marched alongside John Lewis and others to demand access to freedom, a man who had served in the United States military, who risked his life for democracy abroad, but returned home to Alabama and was denied the basic dignity of citizenship. That man began to weep because he understood what was possible in this country if we committed to it. Imagine what it meant for him, a veteran, denied the ability to vote, run out of his hometown for marching for freedom and voting, to stand there at that very same bridge, to look at the bridge and see then President Barack Obama, former President George W. Bush, embracing one another at the base of that bridge that is named after the grand wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. I felt if that man could have hope in the future of this country, how dare I or anyone else question it? And so as part of that experience, the group we were with were asked to be a part of the bridge crossing. And so on the right of my screen, you see my husband and our daughter there. And there are a lot of people, there are hundreds of thousands of people there. Clearly it's pre-COVID. And we start to march across the bridge and our daughter stops and she will not move. I'm a little claustrophobic. I don't really like big crowds. So I'm saying to her, come on, kid, we gotta go. Let's just go before the rush of people start to come behind us. And my husband leans down and asks her, what's wrong? And she says to us, I'm scared because I don't know what's on the other side. This 7-year-old kid stopped me in my tracks because I realized that for many of us in this country, in this moment, we are like her, afraid of what's on the other side. We know we have to make that journey. We know we have to push forward. But because of what we've seen in our past, what we've experienced, what we've read or learned about, it makes us fearful of moving to the other side. Now, as we approach the teenage years, because she's right on that cusp of preteen to teen, I don't know how much longer she will like me, but I know that today in 2020, she counts it as one of her best family trips ever, that she was able to go to Alabama, to be a part of that occasion, to be around the Reverend Dr. William Barber, who fought for the Moral Mondays movement to help us understand how class inequality is not a moral failure, but it is a failure of our ability to value people. She appreciated at that young age what it meant to meet the first 2 women to ever legally marry in the state of Alabama, to hear from undocumented leaders who were saying, we deserve to be here and we deserve to be able to raise our families not in fear. And she tells the story of what it meant to be able to see and meet the late Congressman John Lewis. So again, I don't know in the teenage years what that's going to look like, but I know that experience stuck with her. To be able to see this man who was beaten on that bridge in Selma, who suffered permanent brain damage and a fractured skull, to then go on to become a member of the United States Congress. That is the possibility of democracy, and that is the possibility of community when we commit to it. So that even in his last days, Congressman John Lewis was thinking about the power and the resilience of young people and understanding that no major political movement in this country has ever been waged without young people. And that's why when I look at the comments in the chat, I completely agree with you that young people bring a brilliance that sometimes the rest of us need to get out of the way. That even if we don't understand their language, even if we may not agree with their terminology and their phrase, we cannot deny their passion and their purpose. Now, I realize this picture is going to be hard for some to see. That's intentional. Because 2 weeks after I left Selma, all excited about the possibility of democracy, about what could happen when we come together, about that vision of purpose and future, 2 weeks to the day, I received this picture via text message. And it was of a young man named Martise Johnson. And so I want you to remember his name, write it down, hold it in your memory, Martise Johnson. Because we often know the names of those who do not survive violent encounters, but we need to understand those who do and how they hold that trauma with them. Martise was an undergraduate student at my alma mater, the University of Virginia. Martise is a young man from the South Side of Chicago, raised by a single mother who believed that she could just get her son out of Chicago, out of the South Side, he would be okay. And so this young man, honor roll student, Dean's List student, speaks multiple languages, speaks the King's English perfectly, was not immune to someone who saw him as a threat, as opposed to appreciating his humanity. And so the image was sent to me by current students because they felt like no one was listening to him. Martise was slammed to the ground, suffering this traumatic head injury, bleeding profusely, begging for his life and saying, "But I go to UVA." And it was in those moments that we realized degrees don't protect us. Titles don't shield us. And speaking properly or wearing the proper clothing does not prevent people from experiencing harm. But Martise is a survivor. He's a young man who is now a law student at the University of Michigan. And I love him anyway. I'm an alum of the Ohio State University. Go Bucks, if we ever get to play an actual game safely. But I love him anyway, even though he's at Michigan. Martise was a survivor of that violence. Heather Heyer was not as lucky. 2 years after we were in Selma, 2 years after I was told to go back to UVA to help Martise and help his family, 2 years later, a group of people with tiki torches march across the grounds of my alma mater, reciting racist, homophobic, anti-Semitic rhetoric to say we will not be replaced. And they took the life of Heather Heyer in doing it, but they also took the innocence of young people who said, if you love the Second Amendment, why can't you value the first? Of young people who came together because they did not believe that what was happening in their community was appropriate. And so all of that then means that as we think about, again, these dual pandemics of COVID-19, of racial violence, of the reckoning that is happening, we also understand this need to address the reality that the problems we face today are not new, that we did not get here overnight, that we won't get out of this overnight, but that each and every one of us has to start right where we are. And so now more than ever, you are the frontline workers for community. You inherit the public sphere, the angst and the uncertainty, because you see it when you are fighting for clients who deserve the most basic measures of humanity and recognition. You fight for them, even when it seems that they can't fight for themselves because they have been so beaten down by people denying them and not understanding the totality of their intersecting challenges in our country. And so as we prepare for the next wave of this crisis, as we continue to address the devastating impacts on every aspect of our lives, from education to economic security to mental well-being to housing and food insecurity. We must be unwavering in our commitment to helping vulnerable members as they navigate this crisis. Remember, our ability to do that isn't contingent on who sits in the White House or who sits in the State House. It is contingent on each and every one of us sitting here today. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, history will have to record that the greatest tragedy of this period of social transition was not the strident clamor of the bad people, but the appalling silence of the good people. And I have a sense of hope now that we are disrupting and dismantling that silence and not being complicit in the harm that occurs, that collectively we are choosing community over chaos and understanding that all lives cannot matter until each and every person in this country is able to pursue her purpose without fear of harm, simply because of the color of their skin, where they live, or whom they love. And I also want to acknowledge that the work that must be done does not just fall on the shoulders of those most vulnerable. It requires an intentional commitment from all of us to build today the future that we want to see. And so as I close, I want to remind you of the words of the late Congressman Elijah Cummings, who once said, I want justice, oceans of it. I want fairness, rivers of it. That's all I want. That's all I want. And so, my friends, may we all commit to working for oceans of justice and rivers of fairness. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brown-Dean. We appreciate your perspective so much. And you've raised so many issues and questions. I'm struck by, first, what you said and the question you asked us in terms of the future of democracy and why some of us have expressed hope. And I wanted to explore that a little further, but first I did want to ask Deb if she had a question or an observation as the if you will, the introducer.
Sure. So thank you again, Dr. Brown-Dean. One thing that struck me at the very, very end of your presentation was the slide regarding the needs of, quote, essential workers and non-essential workers, and how one thing we've learned over the last 9 months is which workers truly are essential for our economy. And I think a lot of people's eyes have been opened to what it takes to keep our economy going, what it takes to keep our community going. And I'm hopeful, a little bit hopeful, that we'll do something to make sure that we honor essential workers and make sure that they get paid in a way that reduces those disparities on that chart that you showed us.
Thank you, Deb. And you said it much more politely than I would say. I find it disgustingly criminal that we say to people, risk your lives, risk your health and your family's health because you will return home, so that when I go to the grocery store, I don't have to wait for my favorite type of pear in the store. But while you risk your life and your family's health so that I can have the creature comforts that I think I deserve, I want you to also worry about how you're going to pay for that unexpected medical bill that may come up. And I think it goes back, Deb, to my point that we can't keep seeing poverty or struggle as a moral failure. The moral failing is that we collectively as a country have allowed that to happen. We think about, I think a lot about home health workers who tend to be women of color, many immigrant women. and are paid so little, and yet are entrusted with taking care of our most precious assets, being our elders, or childcare workers who are creating home-based health centers so that people can keep going to work and yet aren't being paid at the comparable rate that they deserve. So I hope that our eyes are opening and that we're thinking from a policy perspective of what we need to do to better support people. Thank you.
Dr. Brown-Dean, we have asked folks to offer some questions, which I'm sure will be coming in. I wanted to refer back to the really wonderful question you asked us about democracy and its future and the hope that people expressed. And I wanted to ask you about your perspective on what I see, and maybe others do too, in terms of why it was hopeful, the fact that so many people came out to vote, that some of our institutions do seem to be holding up in the face of the onslaught, if you will. What is your perspective on the fact that so many people came out to vote?
You know, it's no secret that I am very committed to protecting the vote and affirming the vote. I've spent the last probably 20 months working on a voting rights case out of Georgia as an expert witness because I understand the stakes are high. And what I think gives me hope out of that is that in spite of all the efforts to deny people the vote, people still showed up. In spite of Harris County, Texas, which is a county that is larger than the entire state of Rhode Island, in spite of the governor saying instead of having 12 polling drop-off locations, we're only going to have one, people still turned out to vote. In spite of people facing armed guards in North Carolina, they still showed up. People showed up in Georgia with their chairs because they were not going to be moved. And that says something again about the power of community, that if you want to put people into action, tell them they can't do something, or tell them that their grandmother may not get her Social Security check on time because we've removed postal carriers and messed up the delivery of that. And I think that's something that stretches across political party and across ideology. I don't really want to engage in conversations anymore about what Republicans do and what Democrats do and what libertarians do. I want to talk about what we do. And that was the power of the vote, of seeing the massive record numbers, particularly of young people. It meant something to me to see 18-year-olds who just had a botched graduation a few months prior because we didn't address this pandemic the way we should have, who lost prom, lost graduation, and still said, I'm going to show up to vote. That's what gives me hope. Thank you. Let's see, I see Woodson Wade, I believe, Dietza. If I mispronounce your name, I apologize. Oh, you're on mute. Let me see.
All right. Hi, Doctor. I thank you for, if nothing else, a break in reflection. For me, though, I will say I made the comment that I was a child during the 1960s and had participated with my father, who at the time was working as a young Black Episcopalian, but his connection was to the community, doing a lot of economic community development work. And in that process, we as his family got pulled into this arena. And it's always been an arena that's been around me. And here I am, landed many years later doing this type of work. And I find it so deja vu. I walk in ministry, so hope is absolutely a foundation for me. But I still am in this period of, oh my God, I can't believe that same time, same, just everything so relevant, to what happened in the 60s to where we are now. And when I talk to my children and they find out how it's really come alive from the books they read and the things that I've said in the past, and they're seeing that, I think that's what's spurning a lot of their situations. I have a young Black African male son who's a police officer, so you can imagine the angst in that process. But I will say that it's just, it's very disheartening, because you would think we will have moved. So we've got to be able to cut the root factor and address that. Stop looking at what's above and really go to looking with what's beneath.
Mhm, mhm. Thank you so much. One of the first episodes that I did for my new radio show was called What It Means to Be Black and Blue. And we spoke with 4 officers. One is the director of training for the New Haven Police Department, Sergeant Kendall, born and raised in New Haven. Her family has experienced violence. So she's understood from both perspectives of that, former state trooper, the current police chief of West Hartford, Connecticut, because I wanted to hear from them. How do you navigate being at this intersection of understanding the pain of community and the demands, and that to say, stop killing me, really isn't that radical a statement to make, but also understanding how it can affect who you are as a person versus your professional. But what I will say is different now from, what I experienced when I grew up in Virginia and what I know my parents and my grandparents did. We have an obligation to tell our stories. I get frustrated and irrationally angry when I hear young people say, I am not my ancestors. Yes, you are. Like, my ancestors were warriors. I don't know about, I say this, I don't know about your people, but my people resisted every day in ways that weren't about being a keyboard warrior. But the idea that to read was to risk death, that's about as woke as you can get. So I think collectively, we have an obligation to tell our stories, to tell our family histories, not just the shiny, pretty parts of it, but the ones that have weighed people down with shame, regret, and stigma. And then people will better understand that while you are fighting to deny access to children at the border, remember that those very same policies were used to keep Irish immigrant children from attending public schools in Massachusetts. Because the idea is that if you believe in Catholicism, we're not sure that you will be patriotic. So let's keep your children away from that. Telling those stories means we then don't have to wait to a fight over a statue coming down to understand that common piece. So thank you for sharing. Let's see.
Dr. Brown-Dean, we have a question
Thank you.
from Jess Benedetto, and I'll read it. It feels that we're in a new era of deeper understanding and acknowledgement of these injustices and their underlying causes. Do you think we can see the actual change we need at the same time as this awakening? Or do you feel we as a nation have a long learning curve before we can actually move to true equality and justice for all, systemically and culturally?
I mean, Jess, you don't really ask the easy questions, do you? Let me address some pieces of that. I will speak for myself, but I imagine that what I'm going to share may resonate for many other people of color who are a part of this meeting today. When George Floyd was executed on that street, when Breonna Taylor was executed in her home, a number of my white colleagues and white friends, people I haven't spoken to since high school, reached out and said, help me understand this. How did we get here? Why does this happen? Or said, I didn't know that things were this severe. I thought these things were isolated. I want to talk about it. And at first, I was a little flattered, like, oh, this is great. They trust me enough. They value our relationship that they are willing to be vulnerable with me. And then about midway through the summer, I got so frustrated, like, I don't want to keep having to relive and talk about my pain in order for you to feel more comfortable with your discomfort. And thankfully, there were people to whom I was close enough that I could say, look, this is hard for me to keep discussing this with you, because in some ways it's feeling performative. And I just can't keep going through that. We talk about PTSD as post-traumatic stress disorder. I talk about PTSD as perpetual traumatic stress. And what then came out of that conversation was, well, what can we do collectively so that people have a space where they can engage, where they can ask the questions that are messy and clunky, that if they don't know the word BIPOC, they aren't dismissed because they said people of color, even though their intent was to recognize. How do we get beyond the labels into the substance? And we started seeing that happening, that people were having conversations in spaces they never would have done before. That's sort of the beauty of technology and living in the Brady Bunch box, that you could have those conversations across. And I think that we are definitely on that track, particularly for young people who are doing it, who think it's absurd that you even have to say these things, but understand why. But just the thing that I've seen, you know, I'm a data number geek. You look at public opinion and public support for comprehensive criminal justice reform in May and June, it was about 75% of the American public overall. That number was about 98% for people who identify as Black and or African American. But if we look at that same question in November, the numbers had declined for every group except for Blacks and Asian Americans. And so again, we always ask why. And so the short answer to that very long rambling answer I just gave you, Jess, is this. Americans have a very short attention span. We are always one event, one chaos, one pandemic away from moving on to the next thing. And so what I think is that in those moments where we have the public attention and we have the public square, we have to push as far as we.
Kelly, is Dr. Brown-Dean with us still?
Looks like she's just frozen for a second.
Oh, okay.
So bear with us. Dr. Brown-Dean, if you can hear us, you're just frozen, but it's still showing you in the meeting.
Poetic, perhaps. You mentioned stable Wi-Fi before. Hopefully she can rejoin us.
Okay. So I may remove the spotlight and then put it back on her. Let's see. So it doesn't look like she's here right now. So Joe, you're spotlighted, and she may just try to call back in.
Okay. If she does, we can certainly work that out. And Jess, you might have had a follow-up to your question. We are at 10:40, a few minutes before the break. So if we give Dr. Brown-Dean another few minutes, we could certainly do that, or we can, after a little more housekeeping, we can certainly move to break.
Yeah, I'll just send her a note and just tell her, you know, I'm sure she's trying to log back in now.
Yeah, it'd be great to be able to give her a chance to sort of
yeah.
sum up and say goodbye. That'd be awesome. And for us to thank her again. She was very thought-provoking. Did you say she's trying to get in again?
She probably is, I'm sure,
Okay.
yeah. So I'm just sending her a note.
Okay. Even in this time, I just wanted to actually thank, again, everybody for joining us. We've got almost over 120 participants, which is awesome, or 118 participants, and I think a few more. I don't know if they're counting everybody who's part of the committee. So let's just say 120, which is great. Thank you all, including And I'll just do a special shout out because the privilege of the MC to say hello to our intern, Naomi Garcia from ASCAP from Boston University. So thanks, Naomi, for joining us. I wanted to thank both Rhonda and Kelly for keeping the committee going on this effort, sort of chairing and leading it. So we wanted to thank you. I want a special shout out to you guys as well for all that help. Kelly, has she responded to you at all?
She's back.
She's back.
Okay.
She is back.
Awesome.
Bear with me for 1 minute, everyone, while I find her in this slew of videos here. Oh, there she is. Okay. Okay, you're back, Khalilah. Dr. Brendan, go ahead.
And can you unmute her
Oh.
or?
Yes. Yeah, sorry about that.
I told you it would happen.
We thought you did that on purpose to make a point. So thank you very much for.
And she's gone. I just wanted to say thank you so much again for the opportunity. And I said there that if there were questions I missed, you can feel free to send them to me and I'd be happy to do it. So thank you all so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brandine. Awesome. You were wonderful. Thank you. So that actually brings us to our break time. It's about 10:45. As I said, we've interspersed 15-minute breaks. So this is the first one. If you don't leave your computer completely, you will see sort of a virtual welcome and hello from at least one of our sponsors. But we will rejoin together at 11 for our first panel, appropriately after Dr. Brandine's message. The panel is the role of community action in the social justice movement. All right, we'll see you all in 15 minutes. Thank you. Kelly and Katrina, can we do a quick tech check? Just about the questions, Katrina, I saw Jess's question. Is that pretty much the way it'll go for the panels?
Yes. So I'll do that each time,
Great.
if that's okay with you. And if someone raises their hand, I'll put it in as well.
Okay, no, that was great.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
Joe, everyone can still hear us, so we might want to just do a chat or something.
That's fine. I figured that.
Or we
but
can
just
I
wanted
can
to
put us in a breakout room.
Now, more than ever, people need help from their trusted community action agencies. And to help them, you need seamless connections with referral sources and a case management system to manage contracts, guide your services, and measure the outcomes you deliver. We are SMC partners, and we have been serving community action agencies for more than 10 years. SMC, helping the caring. Now, Now, more than ever, people need help from their trusted community action agencies. And to help them, you need seamless connections with referral sources and a case management system to manage contracts, guide your services, and measure the outcomes you deliver. We are SMC partners, and we have been serving community action agencies for more than 10 years. SMC, helping the caring. Now, more than ever, people need help from their trusted community action agencies. And to help them, you need seamless connections with referral sources and a case management system to manage contracts, guide your services, and measure the outcomes you deliver. We are SMC partners, and we have been serving community action agencies for more than 10 years. SMC, helping the caring.
All right, Joe, you should go ahead and get back because it's 11 o'clock.
Sounds great. Thank you. Well, welcome back, everybody. We want to get started now with our next segment, which is a panel. Actually, we'll have two panels, which will be the balance of our day today, and then we'll have another session tomorrow, which we're looking forward to as well. This first panel is the role of community action in the social justice movement. Certainly, Dr. Brown-Dean's comments lead us to this particular panel. She talked about us moving forward as multiple communities. She talked about the gap between principle and promise. And she talked about how important it is that we work together as communities to address social justice and racial inequality. The panel itself, the summary is several key elements of this past year pushed deep-seated issues of racial injustice and equity, income inequality, and health disparities to the forefront. Across the nation, social justice movements are working to ensure everyone has the same economic, political, and social rights and opportunities. Community action's history is rooted in grassroots advocacy efforts and mobilizing communities. And indeed, we were created alongside the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. Our panelists today will talk about innovative ways they are effectively connecting with their community to address and be part of the social justice movement through engagement, partnership, outreach, and more. Our panelists include Karen Frederick, who is the Executive Director of Community Teamwork, Inc. in Lowell. Karen has been leading the organization for many years. I want to say at least 2 decades. She is joined by Carl Howell, who is the Division Director of Housing and Homelessness Services. And he's been selected as a fellow of the first leaders engaged and activated to drive system-wide change in Lowell. We will also be joined by Patricia Pistone from Montechusett Opportunity Council in Fitchburg. She is the Senior Vice President of Strategy and Innovation. We're thrilled with this panel and look forward to your presentations and some question and answer. We're going to start with Karen Frederick and Carl Howell, and I'll just ask Kelly if you can to put up the PowerPoint. Karen, would you like the PowerPoint to be shown?
Sure, I just have one slide, so we could put it up. And then Carl's going to walk us through the rest.
And then I'm going to let Carl have control. So everyone bear with me for just a minute. All right, Carl, you are all set.
So are we ready to go?
Please do.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
And I also want to thank Dr. Brown-Dean for her remarks. They framed all of the things that, you know, we went through and the profound impact that the racial inequity and the pandemic brought to us here in Lowell. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about community teamwork and how we came to this work that we're doing now. And Carl is going to bring us through the specific things. And I want to thank Carl Howell, who's our Division Director of Housing and Homelessness, whose role he oversees our division here and has done significant work during the pandemic with our homeless work, as well as all of our subsidized housing, but who also willingly took on additional work to help us, to help our organization to really think through how we do this work and how do we move our organization to be anti-racist and how do we really figure out where we are and where we need to go. So to put some context around this, Community Teamwork is a large community action agency and also a regional housing agency. We work in 70 communities, but our home is Lowell and our community action agency area is Lowell and the 7 contiguous towns. That's where our offices are, and our 550 staff are scattered through our service area, but mostly here in the Lowell area. So we are part of this city. We are the largest human service agency in our community action area, and have built up over years strong relationships with local, state, and federal government, along with many, many, many community partners, because most of the work we do is in partnership. We are, as most of you were, organizations that never closed during the pandemic. Our first crisis was working with our homeless population, and that to us laid bare so many of the significant systemic issues in our community. And we early on thought about, how do we respond as an organization, and what is our role? The first thing I kind of thought back to during this time, and I think going through this as someone who is a veteran of community action, I worked in community action since 1978, and I've been the CEO since 2003. So I have a long history and totally embrace the values of community action. We changed and adapted our mission statement, as we all do. We update it every few years. We look at it and see, does it need changing? And the last time was quite a few years ago at this point, when we put the first line in, that community teamwork is a catalyst for social change. And that ran through my mind through the entire pandemic and racial justice issues that were smack in the spring, one after the other. And the fact that we know we're a catalyst for social change made me think about, what are we doing? How is that embedded in our organization? And how are we doing that work in the community? And are we doing enough? And I think, as we talked about this morning, the emotions of sadness, anger, I really felt like we had not done enough. We had not lived this mission of being a catalyst for social change. And in order to do so, we really have to look at internally the organization and externally our work in the community, our work with clients, our work with state, federal, and local government. It first came to us when Carl has been working on a community DEI committee. He's been on that since it started, long before the racial issues of the spring. And they had asked agencies to sign on to a statement asking the city to declare racism a public health crisis. And my first work was to go to the board and talk to them about it, and to talk to our executive management team, both of whom embraced the fact that we should sign on as the kind of organization we are in the community, and that if we did, it might help others do the same and feel more comfortable signing on. We signed on knowing that two of our current board members were city councilors and would probably not be proponents of this. And one of them wrote his own resolution, which was much more tentative than and much less specific than what the DEI committee was asking the city to do. But that was our first step. And really, I think having the support of the board and our executive management team come together to think about, how do we do this work together? How do we do this work in community? And how do we look at ourselves as individuals? I think part of my anger was the things I didn't realize, I didn't know. And that feeling that we should have, I should have known more. I read a lot. You know, I'm a news junkie. I pay attention, but the things I didn't know were stunning to me, and the amount of learning that had to take place. So we pretty quickly added this to our executive management conversations. We were meeting every single day during the pandemic, and we still are, to guide the organization through this really difficult time. And once a week on our agenda is our diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda. We also knew that we needed some broader work in terms of our own diversity. We looked at our we looked internally as well as externally. And while our staff is 49% not white, it's not at every level of the organization in the same numbers. And we realized we need to do work internally and on the board if we're going to really walk the walk and move the organization to be anti-racist. So we revitalized the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. The membership went up and they took on a strong role because you need a pathway, you really need a plan. We decided early on to, as we're redoing our strategic plan, that would be with an equity lens throughout the strategic plan. So we're in process of beginning that work as we finished our needs assessment, and it will be embedded in our strategic plan because we've been committed to following that and to having it be what guides our organization and will really help lead us to be a catalyst for social change. I think this work has had probably the most significant impact on this organization in my tenure, and I think it will continue to because we're committed to being part of the community as well as our own internal work. And I think that the commitment of the board and the executive management team will lead us through this. So I think with that, I'll turn it over to Carl to talk to you about the work that has been going on at Community Teamwork.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Karen.
So as Joe and Karen have stated, you know, all of our agencies where our history is rooted in supporting marginalized communities, supporting racial inequities and disparities across public health platforms. You know, for the last 56 years, that's the work we've been doing. We've been developing and implementing and operating programming to support the people that we serve, the community, in trying to make a more equitable community, correct? So for, you know, Karen gave you a little bit of the history. For the last 3 years, CTI has really dug deep into these questions, and we started asking our questions: how can we be more diverse? How can we be more inclusive? And how can we create a more equitable agency, but also community? And that kind of process led us to bringing in a consultant, and those consultants helped kind of frame the things that we were looking to do and how we wanted to change the culture within our agency. And that all, working with that consultant led us to having a all-day staff day focused on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusionary topics. And the first half of the day was, you know, similar to what we're experiencing today, right? We're talking about the issues, we're educating and making people aware of the things that are going on in the community and going on nationally. The second part of the day was really the most impactful that I feel was we did focus groups, and we're a pretty large organization. We're over 500 staff, and we, you know, created logistics that we were able to do focus groups in an intimate fashion with 10 to 12 staff in a space, in a safe space where they could give us their experiences, their feelings and their thoughts on CTI and being a diverse, equitable, and inclusionary space. Those focus groups revolved around 3 questions. What are we doing well? What do we need to improve on? And what do we need to start doing? Those conversations were honest, they were blunt, and respectful, and what it really did, that was about 2 years ago now. What that did is really kind of propelled us to really looking at ourselves and reflecting at the things that we're doing internally to support our workforce and our employees. That created, as Karen said, we have a diversity inclusion committee. That was the creation. And what this group did is 24 employees across all levels and across all of our departments. That what we did is we took the questions 2 and 3, what do we need to improve on it, and what do we need to start doing? And we took all that qualitative data and started sifting through it trying to find themes, and trying to identify how we can adjust policies and adjust our practices internally to make our space more inclusionary. That led to 6 or 7 months ago, so almost a year ago, that led to us making recommendations to the organization, to the executive team and the board. Those recommendations were, just to give you an example, were ideas around changing our PTO policy or our leave policy to support staff who celebrate religious or cultural holidays that didn't fit in our agency holidays, creating more flexible shifts for staff based on their personal situations if possible, and in creating more events and communication and awareness. As we were rolling these things out, the pandemic hit and everything kind of changed in our organization. We became, we still provided our service, but we became a more remote and virtual space, right? As everyone has. And that made, new challenges and new changes. As Karen said, in May and June, what was going on in the world and the horrible things that we were, forced to look at, changed our organization as a whole, as it probably changed everyone on this call. The murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, those situations changed how we operate. And as Karen said, we started looking at, I think we started looking at less being symbolic and more towards a transformational process when it comes to tackling racial injustices, inequitabilities, and disparities across our community. And we really started looking internally. This led to a month after the death of the murder of George Floyd, to us publicly declaring racism a public health crisis. What I guess some people ask us, what does that mean? Technically speaking, it means that we're declaring racism to be fundamentally embedded in our culture, in our policies, in our systems, and that racism and discrimination leads to BIPOC populations dying at a faster rate than their white peers. BIPOC populations have inferior healthcare, inferior education systems, inferior housing standards, that receive less income, and racism and discrimination creates a toxic space for people of color, which impacts their overall health, correct? But for me, when I look at this, what it means to me is it's a kind of a check. We need to look at ourselves and see how are we potentially enabling these policies, enabling systems that create harm in whether it's in our organization or within our community. And we need to not be symbolic, but we need to be transformational. We need to engage the community and not just offer programming that that supports the impacts of racism and discrimination and social justice, but actually transforms and changes those policies so that programming doesn't need to exist, right? So back to our reflection, we looked inwards at our own practices. We started looking at developing goals and objectives. Our planning department started surveying our staff, surveying our community, holding focus groups at the impacts of racism, so that we can kind of help change and shift our strategic plan. And we're kind of in the final process of our strategic planning, which will help kind of create 3-year goals for us to focus on. We also held trainings with our board of directors regarding equity in social justice that we wanted to work on, so that they understand the kind of the pivot that we're making in the organization, as Karen spoke to. So here are just some of our goals and objectives. We created goals and objectives that are both internal and external. One of the main things that we wanted to do was hire a DEI director, a high-level position that can really help focus on this momentum that we've created and create bandwidth to help kind of steer us in the right direction. At first, we were talking about bringing in a consultant, but after months of interviewing consultants and all, we really made a decision to focus on shifting to hiring a position instead. That while we were looking for a position, we were doing a lot of the work ourselves and engaging in the community and bringing in kind of outside entities to work with us. And what we really realized that bringing a consultant would potentially lose some of our momentum that we're doing, and bringing on additional bandwidth within the organization could help us. As I spoke to, we're focused on increasing our staff and board comfort and fluency so we can have conversations in safe spaces. We can, make our staff aware. When I spoke to some of the surveys that we did, a lot of the feedback that we got from our community and our staff is to really kind of bring more awareness. And so we've really focused on bringing as much awareness and communications as we can. We've also been trying to increase our representation of BIPOC leadership in our board and within our organization. As Karen said, we're 50%, we're a diverse organization. 50% are BIPOC and the other 50 are white. However, once you get up into the higher level positions, it becomes more of a white space. And we need to create kind of pathways for our staff to move up into leadership. And just some of the other kind of quick things, we're looking at ways that we can engage minority-owned vendors and increase advocacy in the community. For our culture, we've been using the Continuum of Becoming an Anti-Racist Organization that was developed by Bailey Jackson and Rita Handyman as a kind of guide to where we want to go. And I put the link in here so you can look at it later, but it provides a continuum from, being an non-inclusive entity to a fully inclusive and anti-racist entity. And it kind of clearly defines what we need to work on and how you move from phase to phase. And that's been a really kind of good guiding space to move forward. One of the things that we've also been really working on to change our culture is a diversity statement. We're really generally following the, equal employer opportunity and affirmative action definitions. And what we decided to do was, we still have to use those because we're funding streams, but really defined what it is to be an anti-biased agency, defining what it is to be that and what it is not to be that, so we can hold staff accountable and create a culture, a clear understanding of what the culture is expected within the organization and when we're working with vendors and on our clientele. As I spoke earlier, we did talk about our strategic plan. We're in the process of finalizing that, but we embedded a whole racial justice and diversity, equity, inclusion stance and goals in our strategic plan. So how do we do this? This is really important because, as Karen spoke about, we were doing things very surface, and it was kind of in the background, like, oh, we need to think about this. But this June changed everything, and we had to create bandwidth, and we had to get buy-in across the agency, and it has to start from your leadership. It has to start from the executive team. So as Karen said, every Thursday we discuss our DEI topics, updates, the projects we're working on, and what's happening across the agency or within the community, so that we're constantly reaffirming the things that we're working on, and that when things come up in the community, whether that's policy or events, that we're engaged in. As I said before, we're embedding this in our annuals and our strategic planning. Every month when we meet with our board of directors, we're doing presentations on these said projects and giving updates. We also hold routine town halls now that we're virtual. And a part of that is also talking about the various diversity, equity, and inclusionary things that are going on and getting kind of feedback from our workforce. Our planning department is identifying grants. They're creating surveys and focus groups. We've done focus groups internally as well as in the community to identify more information. And then we've also reporting data so that we're able to kind of speak about what's going on in our community, how we can address that, how we can work with other organizations and coalitions to help address public health related issues. We've developed a diversity inclusion committee. This committee is 24 individuals. However, we break into small work groups to tackle some of these initiatives that the executive team has identified. And just for example, here are some of the things that they're working on: our diversity statement, our communications. Every single Thursday, we release an awareness campaign that is published to the community, and also on our social media. Highlighting, time-specific events, but also just educating the community on various racial justice and diversity and inclusionary things that are going on. And then we've also created this past summer a new committee called the Racial Justice Advisory Committee, which is made up of 3 board members and 5 CTI staff members. This group meets with the executive team and the board once a month, and really helps advise and hold accountable the executive team and board around the projects and initiatives that we're working on. They're kind of a last check group that helps advise changing language or addressing policies that we're working on within the agency. And do we have any questions?
Thank you so much, Karen and Carl. I think what we're going to do is move to the next presenter, and then we'll have questions at the end. And we'd love to be able to convey to the folks attending your PowerPoint. Very interesting in terms of the detail. And we'll get back, and actually I have several questions which we will get back to. I did want to ask Patricia Pistone to join us and to thank her. I know Kelly is probably pulling up her presentation now, for stepping in literally yesterday. Lena Rodriguez, from MOC, who was going to join us, is under the weather. And so we asked Patricia to join us today and do a presentation about MOC's activity, MOC's work. It turns out that Patricia and Lena work very closely together on this, a lot like Karen and Carl. As Kelly is getting Patricia's PowerPoint up, I just asked Patricia to say hello to her and ask her to join us and to begin to talk a little bit about your work at MOC.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me today. As you mentioned, I'm really honored to step in for my colleague and friend, Lena Rodriguez. As you mentioned, she is unfortunately ill, so our thoughts and prayers are with her today. But as Joe said, I just signed on to do this yesterday, and while he definitely gave me an out to just provide a brief summary of the work that Lena has led at our organization, I felt that it was really important for me to just take a few minutes to speak to that work that she's championed so well within our agency and beyond. Kelly, I'm not seeing.
Yep, just bear with me for one second.
I'll just
work with Carl
I'll continue.
and course right now. So I'm so
that's
sorry.
Fine. So just a little bit about Leona. She's been with our agency for, hopefully she doesn't mind me saying, for over 30 years. Many of you may have come into contact with her either through MassCap or at NECAP conferences. She really grew up within our organization, beginning with the role of executive assistant to the executive director, and now most recently as the Vice President of Community Impact. And she also serves as our Chief Equity Officer, which is the first person to have that title. Some of the work that she has done and really is well respected in the community is serving on local human rights commissions, supporting partner agencies led by people of color, and supporting and building new leadership opportunities within our organization. And I think something that she's really most well known for outside our organization is not only making sure that race equity is part of our work internally, but that it's an important concept within our municipal partners. She actually did a lot of work and played an important role in the recent Black Lives Matter efforts recently, which I'll get to in a minute. So hopefully I now have control.
Yep.
Oh, there we go. So maybe just take a minute just to talk about a little bit of our agency. I think Joe introduced us as Montouster Opportunity Council. We actually changed our name in January to Making Opportunity Count. MOC, like many of you, have been in existence for over 50 years. We do serve, and I'll show a map in a second, 30 cities and towns in North Central Mass, 15 of which are entitlement communities. Overall, this region includes about 250,000 residents, and we cover urban, rural, and suburban communities. I call this out because our strategies for all our work, but especially around race equity, needs to take these differences of these communities into consideration. And as many of you have different service areas, different types of communities, this work I think this approach is really important. Our mission at MOC is to empower families achieve economic security by eliminating barriers and creating opportunities. As part of our CARS process, I am eager to see how this will evolve as we, like Karen mentioned, are being more articulate, I think, in our role as a catalyst for social justice and race equity. So last year, our agency served about 6,700 households, about 18,000 individuals. While we do predominantly serve more white residents, because that is just the makeup of our service area, about 8% of our clients are Black and over 42% are Latino. Our populations of our color primarily reside in more urban communities of Fitchburg and Leominster, but also so does our larger percentages of low-income residents that we serve. And as such, many of our services are located within those urban communities. I've worked for MOC worked with MOC for over 20 years now, both as a board member and now as part of the leadership team, and really have always appreciated that our EEO report has always shown that the diversity in our employees have represented the diversity of the clients that we serve. So while I believe that our agency has always taken our role in addressing race equity and structural racism seriously, the approach has not been holistic and as purposeful as the issue needs it to be. And I think, Karen really highlighted this in her comments. This work needs to include both the internal strategies around service delivery, but really move upstream to address community level strategies that address meaningful policy systems and environmental changes. During our planning for our most recent CARSP, our board and leadership agreed that we must take a more meaningful approach by adding a race equity lens to the entire plan. We also struggled, it was interesting, Carl's comment, finding a consultant that really could assist us to do this. So we used our own internal research capacity as well as Leona's leadership to manage this process. During the needs assessment collection phase, we made sure to capture specific information in our surveys. We worked to address barriers that residents and clients had to participation in our focus groups, and actually led 2 community conversations specifically on race equity, social determinants, and structural racism in the cities of Fitchburg and Leominster. We are currently reviewing, now that we're wrapping up our needs assessment, on how we'll further frame this within our strategy development phase beginning early next year, specifically embedding diversity, equity, inclusion strategies into this work. And as I mentioned, Leona is leading this effort, and we are in the process of developing a committee to assist her and us with this effort. As I mentioned, we do strive to ensure that our staff are representative of our community. Our most recent report shows that mock employs about 30% of people of color. While many of those are in management roles, we are continuing to invest in professional development opportunities that will lead to higher levels of advancement. And in terms of our ongoing work, and this certainly will be called out within the CARS, we need to better apply this race equity lens into the Roma cycle at all points to ensure continuous quality improvement. One example of how we're looking to incorporate this work is using a race equity impact assessment. While I don't have time to really review this all in detail, and I know these slides will be shared, the concept of adverse impacts is important in our work. Just asking the question, who will be harmed by this work, can assist your organizations from negative consequences. And I'd also add that the role of data and the analysis of data is really important in this work as well. We actually just was able to hire a senior data analyst and investing in a data warehouse for us to better identify how gaps in service for specific populations can be achieved, which again is highlighted in this assessment. As I mentioned, we take our role in the community, especially around race equity and structural racism, very seriously. This work has taken on various forms over the years, but most notably this year. And if you'll allow me, I think this is an important paragraph of a recent publication by the Building Movement Project that reported that the nonprofit sector, the 3rd largest employer in the US, is in a state of uncertainty and flux in the wake of the pandemic and economic instability. Not surprising, people of color-led nonprofits, which tend to be smaller, less resourced and community-based, face an even more challenging set of circumstances. Their very survival and that of the communities who rely on them is at stake. The report also stated that simultaneously, these nonprofits are leading and participating in advocacy and organizing efforts for equity and justice. The uprisings of 2020 against anti-Black racism have galvanized these organizations to build cross-racial coalitions and to push for systemic and structural changes. These pictures really showcase the opportunity and responsibility that our organizations can play to support and advance race equity work through advocacy, but also using our expertise and capacity to add structure to this work. Of course, everyone is aware of the national movement on race equity that resulted after the death of George Floyd, and that many demonstrations and marches that took place across the country. The one that was held in Fitchburg, we feel were a little different. While it attracted large crowds like many others, I believe we had over 2,000 attendees, and that this event was led by a local minority coalition, specifically of Black leaders, but it was coordinated with the local municipality and police department. The picture on the left, you can see Leona in the background on the left-hand side. And the chief of police, who is in the center of that photo, is a mock board member, is shown taking a knee with the other participants. And both the mayor and the chief spoke at that rally. I personally was there and was really inspired by the peacefulness and also just the role that youth played in this effort. We believe this was a pivotal point within the community to advance how we seek to address structural racism that exists. And again, while it was an important day, we were really committed to make sure that the conversation continued and had a direct impact, especially on the younger Black residents. I think Carl mentioned this too. We needed to move away from just talking about racism and really moving to more impactful efforts. And I think our race equity lens also added a real focus on health equity as it is a public health crisis. That was being carried out, again, not only with these sorts of demonstrations across the country, but of course during a global pandemic. So we, just making a comment again about that report, that, I also feel like it was very timely and applicable to what was happening in our region. We only do have a couple organizations led by people of color, and they are very fragile, but they're on the front lines of addressing social determinants on health and also leading the conversation on race. One of them, for example, that provides important food services and a community kitchen, especially to the Latino community, was just recently forced to shut down for 2 weeks due to COVID. So internally, not only did we shift our internal capacity to allow Leona to provide capacity to these external efforts and organizations, we also recognize the importance of providing them with operational funds necessary to do this work. This type of shift is necessary to ensure that these organizations are not only able to address the present need, but be here for the long term. And to really support the efforts around these inequities exist for Black specifically, we funded the Three Pyramids organization, a local organization that has been in operation as a state certified minority organization since 1973. And we focus these resources on 3 areas: youth engagement, community leadership, and financial empowerment. MOC and Three Pyramids had identified an opportunity to address some of the critical challenges facing young people in our communities, and are working together to address these needs through the reuse of a building formerly and somewhat ironically owned by a now defunct organization led by people of color. While this project had legs prior to the May rally, we really retooled the center's approach to make sure that youth of color were at the center of this work. Youth have led this entire effort, from leading a founders group in charge of developing the vision, operations, and development plan, to working directly with the architect on the design. And key elements of the project really focused on addressing the fact that marginalized communities and low-income families have had less access to cultural institutions and technology resources. And this project seeks to address that. And in line with the work at the Youth Innovation Center, we've also shifted our work to be more virtual. Over the summer, Three Pyramids, supported by Leona and her staff, provided leadership training to over 40 youth individuals, focused on financial empowerment, history of structural racism, impacting systems change through policy advocacy. And actually 6 of those leaders, along with the Three Pyramids director, and I met with, at the time, Senate candidate Congressman Kennedy, to discuss what the needs of our youth are in our community. And then lastly, MOC recently developed a financial empowerment center in collaboration with our local United Way, Three Pyramids, and Fitchburg State University, as well as some local financial institutions. Launching an effort like this includes a number of strategies beyond just coaching, credit repair, and financial education. which really does include building a network of asset building opportunities that lead to family economic advancement. And this work too really did look to layer on an approach to race equity and really trying to include and engage people of color into the work and really allowing the executive director of Three Pyramids, Adrian Ford, who is a close partner of our agency, to really lead this effort. And I know we're going to be moving to questions, but I just wanted to also call out that if anyone has any further questions, I also incorporated Leona's contact information in here as well.
Thanks, Tricia. We really appreciate it. And again, thanks to all the panelists. We have some time now for questions, and there are some in the chat. I again wanted to thank all of you for your discussion. It's inspiring in terms of your thoughtful approach, your engagement of the community, your engagement internally, and the way that you plan to sustain this effort. And those are a few of the things that we'll explore in this discussion. I do have some questions, but I wanted to start with one that's come from the participants. And this is from Stevie Santos. It's for Carl. How involved is the local police department in the committees and community programs? And actually, Tricia, we'll ask you to answer that one as well. But Carl, how involved is the local police department in the committees and the community programs?
That's a good question. The local law enforcement, I would say the topic of racism, either being a public health issue or just in just a sense has created a lot of tension in the city of Lowell. It is, I think that there are measures that the city is taking, specifically the school departments and the police, to create kind of civilian advisory boards to help kind of move towards a more equitable space and repairing the, I guess, relationship or between the citizens and the police force, or the perceived tensions that are between the police in the community. But I would say that it's probably could be a lot more collaborative, and it's kind of maybe coming from them down instead of engaging with the community a lot more than that they should be.
Thank you. And then Tricia, maybe the same question. And then there's another one that's come in as well, which we'll ask. Go ahead, Tricia.
Sure. And I mentioned this briefly, just for example, the demonstration that took place in May was really done in collaboration with our police department. We have a very supportive police chief here in Fitchburg. He's born and raised in the city. And while the city has historically had some issues, which are unfortunately common across the country, he has really worked to change the face of the department. And I don't have the exact statistics, but there really is equity and diversity, I should say, in the department. And they've been very willing and have played I think, an important role in certainly the dialogue over the last 6 to 8 months. Again, that's
Great.
One community that I'm talking about. That is, unfortunately, we serve 30 cities and towns. So it is a little more difficult to answer that question. But I will say that our police chief is actually the current chair of the state police chief board. And I think he certainly serves as a good example in that role.
Thank you. A couple other questions have come in, and I want to direct this next one to Karen. Again, thank you, Karen, for your leadership in this area. In the conversations we had early at MassCap, we were very interested in what Karen was explaining to us. So this is a question for you for community teamwork. What has been the reaction from the local community to the decision and announcement that the agency has made this past summer announcing that racism is a public health crisis? Has the community been receptive or has there been pushback?
Well, both. So as you can imagine, Lowell's, you know, a city that has done a lot right in terms of accepting and welcoming immigrants. It's almost a third Southeast Asian, a very diverse city. However, Lowell also has issues in terms of, if you look at the school department, where it's majority. I think it's over 90% of the staff are white. Similarly with city government, mostly white, and has struggled and had a lawsuit for how elections are held here in the city. And they settled the lawsuit by changing the elections. We had all at-large candidates and we'll now have a combination of district and at-large. So as you can imagine, there are people holding on to power, as in most cities. I had 2 board members publicly resign from our board of directors at the city council meeting because they felt like we were calling the city racist. And I think both Kyle and I testified at the city council meeting. We spoke at rallies, and we're very careful to use data around what this means. We weren't calling the city racist. We were pointing out why this was a public health crisis. I think it will forever ring in my ears one of the things a healthcare executive said to me when I was frantically trying to get testing for our shelter guests. And they said to me, when they can't breathe, call 911. That was the response. And so, yeah, there was pushback and some, you know, from our conservative newspaper, you know, why are our nonprofits involved in this? Why are nonprofits taking a stand? We went on, Carl and I both went on local radio, sent, you know, articles into the paper, communicated through social media over and over again. And I would say most of the feedback has been positive. Most of the feedback has been, keep doing what you're doing. You're helping change hearts and minds, and that we are glad you're doing it. So, you know, I think because we're an established organization and had built up goodwill, people understood why we were doing this for the most part. And I think having 2 board members leave gave us an opportunity to diversify our board further, which is exactly what we did. So I thank our board for taking the bold stance and being with us along the way as we've done this very publicly.
Thanks, Karen. It sort of reflects the wisdom of pushing ahead. Opportunities arise. The next question is from Amos Smith, and it's for both organizations. What was the drag in the past on recognizing that upper management did not provide pathways to management for Black and Brown staff? What was the drag in the past? Let's start with Tricia or Karen.
I was going to say, you know, I think it's a great question, and you know, I think as we are trying to, you know, put a better lens and process in place for professional development for our staff, you know, I think the easy answer was that there wasn't a pipeline, but we realized that it's our responsibility to help create that pipeline. And I think community action, where we've had a history, I mean, so many of our managers that we have in place today started off as Head Start parents. So, you know, I would say that while there may be a drag, we also probably have one of the best histories of that within our overall network. but it's finding more opportunities, and it comes down to being more purposeful, and in an investment. And I would also say that while it sounds kind of wonky, the role of data in all of this, I think, is really important. And as Karen was just saying, is the proof is in the data. So as we talk about diversity of our staff and making sure that we're addressing barriers of clients, it's really staying on top of that, and addressing those needs.
So
Thank you,
I
Karen.
think Tricia's right. It is the opportunity and in the intentionalness of providing those opportunities. And, we instituted tuition reimbursement for our staff. We've worked with now Tufts on the leadership program that Carl went through and many others. And we have partnered we're working with a consultant on intentional succession planning, right? So that we do have those pipelines, that we offer more opportunity. And, I think about it about that question. When I was hired in 2003 as the CEO, I was told before my interview, no woman would ever run this organization. And the management team was all male, all white male, pretty much, except for me. So, I think you look at when people look like you, that's what we have to provide, people in positions that look like our community. So that gives people the vision that I can do that job, and I should be in that job, and I'm qualified to be in that job. And I think we have not had that in all levels of the organization. And I think for all of us, admitting that we have work to do and then planning on how to do that work is where we've come down to, that we have to be public about it. And I've said that at the city council meeting, and I said it at the rally. We're not where we need to be either, and we will work harder to get there.
I just want to add to that is, I think that, adjusting our recruitment processes, actually looking at the data, but the awareness, confronting that conversation, we're still working on adjusting those policies to be even more equitable. I know that, say, like in my division, we've created a lot more positions, and what I mean by that is, when I first got here 11 years ago, there were huge jumps. It was like you're a case manager to director, and what we started doing is creating a lot more middle management to allow people to gain the experience that is needed so that they can move into positions. On top of that is we've, constantly looking at our job descriptions and changing the language and changing the qualifications so that not discriminatory. And what I mean by that is, educational experience, qualifications, those type of things that, that you may not think about, that do kind of make it difficult for people to advance to the next level. And again, for example, if the next position up requires 3 years of management experience or supervisory experience, but you have no ability to create your case managers or the next tier up to have that experience, all you're doing is hiring from outside your organization and bringing in. So it's creating those kind of opportunities for. I would also like to credit the executive team, because they have been engaging over the last few years around succession planning, and we brought in consultants to do that. And one of the things that we've really moved towards is looking at how we identify talented staff and incentivize them to and kind of groom them into leadership, which is things we weren't really doing prior. And so I think that's been really, really helpful. And going back to Karen's kind of perspective or statements, people don't. For example, when I was hired into the executive team, there wasn't anyone of color in the executive team. And I think that moving into that role, my division is probably one of the most diverse divisions in leadership positions. And I think that's not by coincidence. I think that the fact that I am in a leadership position presents opportunities. And I think that's one of the things that we've talked about with the city and the school systems is you need people, you need to give opportunity because it also gives people not the role models, but it gives them the belief that, oh, I can move up in this organization. I can, aspire to higher level positions within here because they recognize that people of color or, BIPOC populations have that pathway. So thank you.
Joe, I was just going to also add that, it also speaks about to retention and pay equity. Right. And, paying for experience. And, I think that's something that we are internally looking at in terms of our wage scale, but also, to Carl, your point around number of years of experience or education, not only making it easier and reducing barriers to becoming employed within community action, but allowing them to stay with us, to build up that experience and into more leadership opportunities. And again, it is a competitive market, especially for bilingual staff. So we need to make sure that our salaries are commensurate of that experience and those skill sets.
Thank you all. Unfortunately, we're at the end of the time for this section. Amos, thank you for your thought-provoking question, and Stevie as well for yours. There's so much here. To summarize very inadequately, what it sounds like, and I think that the PowerPoints will give people an opportunity to think about how they might start if they haven't, or how they might continue. It sounds like what's really critical is taking stock, building on the existing commitment to this work, making a plan, carrying it out, adjusting it, and then looking for ways that it can continue and it can be sustainable. And there's more obviously to that. So we very much appreciate your presentations and your questions. We are at the point of a break. Why don't we give ourselves 15 minutes? We'll be back at around, well, let's say 12:15. Again, I want to thank the panelists.
Hey,
thank
Joe,
you all for your questions.
Joe,
Yes,
just make it to Carl, Patricia, and Karen. I want to applaud the courage that you all had to take to make those moves, even when it's apparent that you ought to do what you all have done. A lot of people still stand still, and so I don't want to just ask questions. I want to continue to encourage you to grow and mature your organizations and bring it into the 22nd century.
Thanks, Amos.
Thank you, Amos.
Much. We appreciate it. We will revisit this, I'm sure, in different forums. So thanks, everybody. We'll move to the break, and it's noon, and we'll see you back at 12:15. Thank you very much. Well, welcome back, everybody. Thank you for rejoining. First of all, as we get the first presentation going and sort of queued up, I just wanted to take this minute to thank Karen and Carl and Tricia for the last presentation, very thought-provoking. Just as Dr. Brown-Dean's discussion led to that previous session on addressing racism, her discussion leads not only to this one that we're about to have on making moving pieces of the many moving pieces of crisis, it also will lead us to one of tomorrow's sessions on the digital divide. So please join us tomorrow for that one. Now I'd like to get started with this panel session on the many moving pieces of crisis. Let me just give a couple of words of intro and then we'll introduce our panelists. I don't think anybody looks forward to a crisis just so that they can then create an opportunity. But the crisis that we are in now has certainly given us the opportunity, if you will, to address the crisis and to learn from it. And so we'll learn today from our panelists just about that. When a crisis hits, how do you support your community, your agency, and your staff simultaneously? How can you respond to the crisis at hand in the moment while continuing to plan your agency's future? In the wake of COVID-19, community action agency leaders reflect on lessons learned, strategic planning approaches, improved procedures, and how they ensure their staff have the tools and resources needed to thrive so they can effectively serve customers in need. It's my pleasure to thank and introduce our panelists. Lena will go first. Lena Rodriguez is the Executive Director of the Community Renewal Team in Hartford. We've worked with Lena for many years and we're so glad that you're here to join us on this. And Pam Kuechler is a relatively new Executive Director at PACE, People Acting in Community Endeavors in New Bedford, Massachusetts, but has been with and around community action for many years as well. So thank you both. Lena, welcome, and please get us started.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. Unfortunately, my background is not working. It worked earlier, but apparently I have so many colors in my office that it doesn't allow it to capture the background. It has like different moving parts, so I apologize for that. So I'm sorry that the view that you have is all of my files and work here at CRT. But thank you for having me today. The many moving pieces of crisis. All of us know that we have been going through a lot within the last 9 months. I'm going to share with you what CRT has done, how CRT has taken on this crisis and continues to take on this crisis today. Just share with you all of the events that we went through, how we went through them, and what we plan on doing moving forward. So I'm looking forward actually to hearing some of the things that other agencies have done as well. So let me just give you a little bit of background of CRT. So CRT's mission is preparing our community to meet life's challenges. Our values here is acting with integrity and responsibility, deliver quality programs and services, treat all people with respect and dignity, constantly pursue excellence, and we work to create long-term solutions that help people build lives of stability, dignity, and sustainability. That's who we are. Next slide, Cal. So we are a 501c3 nonprofit. We were incorporated, like many of you, in 1993. We have a $49 million operating budget, very diversified within federal, state, and private dollars. We have over 400 full and part-time employees. 94.9% of every dollar that comes into the agencies goes directly to programming. And we're very, very proud of that. So who do we reach? We reach 56,304 individuals, 24,000 families served, and that fluctuates on an annual basis. These are last year's number. In terms of the people that we serve, 34% are Hispanic or Latino, 28% are Black and African American, 40% multi-race, 32% white. and this is the greater Hartford and Middlesex counties. Our core service area encompasses 40 towns in this area, but we have people, because of the diversified programming that we have in the agency, we have people coming in from over 120 towns. Every year we print a community report card that shows exactly how many people come through our doors, where they come from throughout the state of Connecticut, and what services we provide for them. So that's why we know how many people come in and from what areas they do come in. Again, our service areas are in the south end of Hartford, north end of Hartford. We have satellite offices in East Hartford and Middletown. So programming, well diversified in terms of the reach of our programming. Basic needs, mental health and wellness. We have a behavioral mental health clinic, education and youth programming, employment and training, energy and weatherization services, housing and shelters, community corrections, money management, senior services. We developed, operate, and own a assisted living facility where we have 100 units of assisted living. We have veteran programs, and recently, unfortunately, we have COVID programming. So managing crisis while supporting community agency and staff. So one of the things that that came to mind for me immediately was, as leaders of our organizations and people in high level positions and directors and vice presidents and so forth, we have to be prepared to lead, right? So we know that the storm is coming, and although we want ourselves to, sometimes go and hide ourselves because we know what that storm is going to look like, we do have to prepare ourselves for leadership and for the crisis. So I think that from a leadership perspective, calmness and steadiness at the top has to come and has to be deliberate. Our staff and all of the employees take our cue from us. And if we're not calm and if we're not being decisive and working with those, we're not going to know all of the answers, but we certainly have to be in a place and a mind to be able to lead and to be able to create that level of calmness in within our agency, for our staffs and for everyone. So in terms of managing these crises. So a little bit about what we did. Going back, Kelly. So what we did on March 12th, I mean, everything was kind of very up in the air. The CDC, all of the governors was on the phone, all these kind of directive and decision kind of insights were coming from everywhere. Things were changing by the hour. For us, immediately we convened our leadership team. Our leadership team consists of our vice presidents, our director of our offices, our facility staff, our communications directors. Everybody came to the table, and that's to do two things. The first thing, I think that what I wanted to do was to make sure that I took everybody's temperature. So when I say everybody's temperature, leadership teams, even though they're in different positions and they do exceptionally well running their departments and running their particular areas, we don't know how people basically react under crisis. We don't know how they deal with this kind of pressure. So it's our job, it's the leadership job, it's my job to make sure that when I bring my leadership team together, that I basically check the temperatures of how they're doing. How are they reacting to the anxiety levels, the fear factors, the coping mechanisms, and so on and so forth, because I'm going to need my team to be able to carry out the strategies and the plan that we put in place to be able to deal with this crisis. And I've got to be able to support that team and know where they're feeling and how and if they can actually help in this regard. So that's the first thing that we did. So the leadership team came together. We touched base with everybody to see how everybody was. This allowed us to move forward and to think about who is going to do what, other than what their roles and responsibilities are in the agency, and also to look at now moving forward to effectively put a plan and strategies in place to move forward. So after taking up the pulse of everyone and giving everybody the support, and I will tell you at that moment, there were folks that basically wanted to go home. So that was March 12th, and we had leadership staff that actually from that day forward went home and worked from home, could not be in the office working on these day-to-day strategies, which is what the whole purpose of that meeting was, which was perfectly fine because people were more effective in different locations. But that was a really good move just in testing who can do what period of time, and how to effectively utilize the talents of the leadership team. So after we did that, we created our own war room. War room is a famous term that's used by the IT departments, IT groups, which is basically a place where you have regular brainstorming and strategy planning meetings. The first, starting from March 12th, we met 3 times a week. And we met 3 times a week because things were changing by the hour. We've had people, all kinds of directions coming from the governor's office, coming from the CDC. So we were constantly meeting to talk about strategy and planning moving forward. We assigned additional responsibilities to people based on their skill set. We had our own Dr. Fauci, and here's the doll. He was giving us all of the advice that we needed here. So we brought Fauci into the room. Our Dr. Fauci in-house was our VP for Clinical Services, Heidi Lubecken, who really did an amazing job, I think, really keeping track of all of the CDC protocols and requirements, and who reported them out at every meeting that we had. And she basically was the person assigned to it because she is responsible for clinical service. But more importantly, she oversees our assisted living facility, which has 100 beds of seniors, and all of our clinical services, our behavioral mental health clinic, which was mostly the most highly scrutinized, I would say, and regulated facilities of what we had here in the agency. So that's what we did there. That's where we started our planning. We shifted to looking at how do we support our staff. So Kelly, next one. Thanks, Kelly. So how do we support our staff and the agency? So the first thing we did, we didn't have a work from home policy. I mean, I think that most agencies, most community action agencies, this was heavy lifting to actually move people from working in the community, which all of our locations were all about people coming in, foot traffic, our energy assistance centers filled with people waiting to take energy applications. So who would have thought that we would actually have our energy workers working from home, working remotely? But we had to create a work from home policy, which meant that we had to evaluate all positions to determine who could work from home. We did that. We reviewed all the policies and procedures concerning exempt and non-exempt, because even though you're in a pandemic, there are expectations that you continue to meet all of the regulatory requirements and all the labor law requirements. So we made sure that we reviewed all of that. We created a sick call-out questionnaire for supervisors. So when folks called in and said they were ill, we were making sure that we would ask them and know whether or not it was COVID related so that we can be prepared for the tracking. And this was early on because people were calling out sick, and we wanted to make sure that we didn't have a spread kind of situation there. So we created a questionnaire for that. We also set up systems and protocols to be able to track and trace based on this questionnaire. And when it came, we quickly implemented the Family First Relief Act, which actually provided some, basically the funding for folks that had COVID-related absences to be able to be paid from these funds. So initially, that's how we supported our staff, and we continue to support our staff that way. In addition to that, from the IT department, Kelly, we evaluated, thinking that everybody now is being deployed to work from home. We evaluated our computer inventory for deployment. Lucky thing that we did have a number of computers that were able to be cleaned out and redistributed to folks that were working from home. We ensured that all of the staff who could work from home had the tools to work from home. And that was assessing their internet capabilities and whether or not they needed additional phone requirements. We did that. We provided team viewer software for employees for remote access into their workstations so that they can have access to their files and documents. So we made sure that when people were home, they were able to be as productive as possible, giving them all of the resources they needed to continue to do their work. In addition to that, I know we all think that it's a pain in the neck, but we all made sure that all of the employees continue to fill out their PARS sheet while they were working at home. So in terms of helping the community, Kelly. So supporting the community. We knew that we were never going to close. We're an essential agency here, even though the governor, not by title, but of course by service need, identified us as an essential agency. We knew that we were going to stay open. So the question was, how are we going to stay open? How are we going to repivot? How are we going to pivot to be able to continue to provide services that are needed in the community while everything's supposed to be closed and there's no foot traffic going into your buildings? What were we going to do? How were we going to change operations? So we spent a lot of time going through every program within our agency to look to see how do we change how we do business, how do we repivot, and how do we remodel our programming. So looking at behavioral health clinic. The behavioral health clinic, everybody walks into the behavioral health clinic and receives services. It's in a big waiting area. They come in to see their clinicians. We had to close when the governor's executive order came down initially. But the good thing is that we got telehealth, which was a blessing that we received telehealth privileges that was reimbursed by Medicaid. So that was a huge, huge help for us. We quickly implemented, got the resources that we needed to do to be able to make sure that people were set up with their phones, the clients were set up with their phones, that we had access to make appointments for telehealth services. Amazingly enough, using telehealth, there were less no-shows than would be ordinarily in our behavioral health clinic. So people really had the need to be calling into their clinicians. So this is an interesting revelation in terms of moving that forward. People, in terms of the commute coming in on a bus line, getting into our clinic was no longer, I guess, a burden for many people that were no-shows. They were directly on their phone talking to their clinician. So that was a huge kind of paradigm shift for us. But that immediately took place in terms of how we changed providing services for behavioral health. Next program, we looked at the nutrition department. So CRT serves over 3,000 meals a day in Meals on Wheels and congregate settings. People were no longer congregating. So the seniors weren't eating at the senior centers, like many of you, I'm sure, have gone through the same scenario, many of you. They weren't eating at the senior centers, they weren't congregating. So we had to quickly change and go to grab and go meals. So what did that mean? So that means that we have to do a repackaging. So we've got to go repackage. Now it's no longer basically the platters of food that you provide at the congregate sites. Now it's individual packages for folks, a lunch and go. We quickly changed into that and prepared that. Problem is, we had a big problem early on with volunteers and drivers. Our volunteers, many of them, which are great, we can't do this program without them, as many of you, are seniors themselves. So they were seniors themselves, and they were very, very afraid of coming out and delivering any food or being a volunteer coming out their homes. Totally understood that. Drivers as well. So what we did was we knew in our war rooms, in our meetings, that we had to prepare for this, because we knew that they were going to be leveling off as we moved forward with this pandemic. So we continued with our communications director, who did an amazing job, moved forward and went on social media to advertise, to ask for college students that were home if wanted to drive, or people that wanted to come in for volunteers and replace these volunteers. And to our surprise, we were very successful. I mean, it was difficult for a time, because I wouldn't say that there were hundreds of volunteers coming in, but people did come and volunteer. So people were available to volunteer, and we did have people, the volunteers falling off and the drivers falling off. But as the pandemic continued and things got a little bit more kind of steady and less kind of, I would say, scary for people, people came back to work, and the volunteers came back to the agency. So, but that was the nutrition department. So we continue to kind of look at every particular program. Our assisted living facility, I am extremely proud of the work that we did there. 100 beds. And to this day, 9 months into this pandemic, we have not had one positive case. And that was because, and I think that we're only 2 in the state, And that was because early on, we instituted some bold and strong decisions. One was we had to close down basically the building to visitors and vendors in the building. And I will tell you I had to go and talk to, it's like talking to 100 of your grandparents and them telling you, you're not allowing, how could you not allow my family members to come in? They wanted to go to the supermarket. We said, you shouldn't be going out to the supermarket. We'll bring the supermarket to you. We actually had a lot of pea pods coming in. So we were closing off the doors. And this was March 16th or so, early March, that we closed it off to visitors. That was not without a challenge with the seniors for sure. But we did close it early, which was hugely successful for us. We also made sure that we took the temperatures early on of all of the staff within the facility. And we also shared with the staff that if they wanted to work for us at the retreat, that they couldn't work for multiple nursing homes, because what would happen was that staff that were working in multiple sites, those would travel on to the
Kelly, I think Lena is muted.
Am I talking too much, Kelly? Did you mute me?
Oh, I'm sure it was a glitch.
So
Just a glitch, Lena. I think you have maybe 5 minutes left.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, I'll cut it short. So the thermometers, taking temperatures early on, closing the dining room, and also the last thing I think that we did that really helped the people in the assisted living facility was keeping families connected by providing tablets to them, so they can zoom into their family members. Okay, scroll on. So shelters, everybody in the state decompressed from congregate shelters to the hotels, worked very, very successful for everyone in the state. Moving on. Weatherization program, that's a program that very much we had to really pretty much close it down just to training and entering audits in the NEAT system, because nobody was allowing anybody in their house to do any kind of weatherization services or any audit. So we closed that down. Supporting the community again, everything went virtual, telehealth, distance learning, online storytelling for our early care and education program. Financial literacy basically went virtual, but we had to get permission from the program folks to be able to actually do that. There's a graduation coming soon. I think it's this Friday, where they're going to actually graduate virtually. Our Women's Empowerment Center had a bunch of leadership workshops, which were all virtual. Case management services went virtual. Energy assistance went virtual. We also helped the community I chaired a basic needs committee for the city of Hartford for reopening the city of Hartford with a bunch of other leaders from Hartford. We came up with solid recommendations for reopening, which included partnership with a lot of other organizations. Craftsmanship. Oh, just to let you know that we applied for every single grant available through COVID-19. That was for sure, to make sure that we had all resources that we can gain to be able to help the community when things are now, when everything with more moratorium stopped, and we know that we're going to need discretionary monies moving forward. Communication is key. I think that our communications director had close communication with the media to let them know where our services were being provided, what we were actually doing, that we weren't closed, that we were open, and how exactly we were providing services. So we did social media. We reached out to all of our employees, kept all of our employees apprised of what we were doing, how we were operating, what was open, moving forward. And then traditional mailings that we sent out to parents and to employees as well. So moving forward, like I say, this is in terms of lessons learned, I think that we've done a lot. I think there's still a lot to do. This is far from over. We are still learning. We are in our strategic planning. Before this happened, we were in our strategic planning process, assigning dates as to when we're going to actually engage with our consultant. We canceled that, of course, because business has changed tremendously. So now we're going to re-engage, who knows, within a couple of months. But then now moving forward, we're going to be looking at what is the new business model for community action? What is the new business model for CRT? What have we learned through this COVID-19 that we can institutionalize? And more to come. More to come to see how we can change and how we can institute what we've learned to move forward and change the way we do business, because I don't think we're going to be operating as we did in the past. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm sure that folks will have questions in particular about your last point. And so if you all do have questions, please start putting them in the chat. We'll make sure to ask them of Lena. But now we wanted to turn to Pam Kuechler and ask Pam to talk a little bit about their response in New Bedford, Massachusetts.
So thank you, Joe, and hopefully the technology will cooperate with me as well. So Lena, really remarkable things that you guys did in your world, and it's really inspiring to listen to all that you have to manage and all that has been able to be accomplished. Just to give you a small background, PACE is a local community action agency that serves the greater New Bedford area in the southeastern corner of Massachusetts. Our main service area is greater New Bedford. That includes Dartmouth, Fairhaven, Acushnet, Mattapoisett, Marion, and Rochester. We do have programs that actually serve the entire southeast part of the state. So up to 43 communities, cities and towns. Okay, Kelly, I'm having trouble.
Oh, I think you should be good, Pam.
Okay, great. So we have a variety of programs similar to Lena's program, and very diversified. We're a $74 million agency, but $63 million of that is pass-through money that either gets distributed directly to clients through our fuel assistance program or through our Child Care Works program, providing child care subsidies. And that's the program that actually serves the 43 communities and towns. And so having such a diverse set of programming, similar to Lena, we serve folks, face-to-face across the agency. Clients were used to coming into the program, sitting down with their caseworkers or with their teachers. Volunteers were in. Head Start has parents and children in and day out. Our Youth Build program, which is a youth education program, working on job sites and in the community. And as Joe mentioned, I'm newer to this role at PACE, entering as the executive director in July of 2018. However, I did have the benefit of actually being associated with PACE for 25 years. I started 25 years ago and took a 7-year hiatus in the middle to run the Mass Head Start Association, and came back 2 years ago. So the traditional ways that we served were some of the things that we were actually working on as we unknowingly moved into last fall. To spend my first year working with the new assistant executive director to kind of assess system services and really start to think about what are some ways that we could begin to centralize and create a more agency-wide consistency in our procedures and policies. And there were a couple of fortuitous things that took place leading into what we're now doing as an agency that set us up for being able to do some of the things that I'm going to feature a little bit later. So we serve over 25,000 families in the course of our time in a year, and then COVID-19. So I think as we the defining moment for me, or the hit in the face moment that COVID-19 was actually going to be something we really needed to be concerned about and really was going to impact us, was when NECAP was canceled. And I thought, oh, I guess we won't be traveling. I guess we won't be coming together. And it really started to kind of come together in our minds that we were going to have to really take a hard look at what we were doing in the event that we were going to have to move forward and make changes. So it became clear we really needed to take a look at whether we were ready. And the three main questions that we were asking ourselves is what immediate steps we had to take to keep people safe. How did we prepare and implement a shift to a remote work setting, and what were going to be the critical community needs that we had to kind of step up to do. So we actually really decided to aggressively, once we realized at about the 10th or so of March that we were going to have to make a change, we sort of jumped in with both feet and said, really, whatever is necessary to continue to provide our services and be as creative as possible. We pulled our leadership team together and really asked them to think about what did we need to do. So we had sort of an internal, external response that was taking place simultaneously. A group of service providers came together and started to meet daily in our community. We shifted to topic-specific or needs-specific meetings that took place. Our senior leadership meeting moved to weekly, but similar to how Lena started with her team, I pulled them together and we started to really work almost on a daily basis to figure out what were our needs going to be, how are we going to be able to get the technology that we needed, because we were a little bit behind the 8 ball in that sense. So you'll see later on some of the wins that we have taken away are really things that maybe many of you have already been doing, but out of challenge comes opportunity, and we really tried to do our best to maximize from a technological standpoint, making the most of it. We made sure we stayed in biweekly communication with the board of directors so they knew that we were happy what we were doing. Getting the word out to all of our clients that we were going to continue to serve them, but that we really couldn't do it internally. And on that March 13th date, we basically shut the doors and said, there'll be no clients coming in. Volunteers, thank you for all of your help, but we're really going to ask you to stay home and stay safe. And we're, we really need to, make sure that safety was the key tenet that we were working off of, based off of all the information that we had, and that we really needed to just keep staff working at the moment. We also identified we identified a communication plans for our staff so that we would be letting them all know how we were proceeding, and realized that our food pantry really could not close, that this was an emerging critical need that we really were going to have to deal with. Housing as well, and I'll get to that in a little bit. So this is sort of a very high level flow of sort of how we decided to move forward. And so we made the decision to, whoops, sorry about that. Kelly, can we go back? I can't make it, for some reason it's not going backwards. To the arrow, please.
So Pam, since you're doing it, you should be able to just click on it and it'll move. And use the arrow.
No. It's
there
going
we go.
Forward, not backwards. There we go. Thank you. So we made the decision to close. Our leadership team came together and helped put together a policy that would be agency-wide, with each program having to deal with individual requirements. So we have a Head Start program with state licensing and federal requirements. We have our Child Care Works program has been providing support to all the early childhood programming in the southeastern part of the state. So a variety of expectations. Our Health Access program and our Fuel Assistance program both have been encouraged to stay remote and to continue to serve clients remotely. And so we sort of had some overall guiding principles and expectations and requirements procedurally to make sure that we were maintaining protocols to keep everybody safe. We've continued, and that happens still to this day, ongoing regular coordination with external partners, and sharing of resources together to make sure that the major community needs are being served. And then the one piece that you know, we continue to be reminded of is that we have ongoing response to COVID events across the agency. So our childcare, our Head Start program has been faced with the reality that they've been serving children since July, and until this past week, we didn't really have any issues with COVID, but we, as recently as this past weekend, had to deal with how do we make some decisions to ensure that we continue the safety of the children attending while continuing to provide virtual services as well. So, you know, we are learning as we go with the giving ourselves the permission to try something, and if that doesn't work, making the shift. Understanding that everybody is figuring this out as we go. There's no playbook for this kind of an emergency, and really appreciating the fact that we take from the experts and we make as many good educated decisions as we can to move forward. And at the same time, we started to finally be able to take a look beyond just COVID and shift back to our long-term planning. So similar to CRT, we were in a strategic planning process. We had to put a pause at March 13th, and we're moving now back into, you know, how are we moving forward? We're finishing our community assessments to get into the state, and over the next 6 months, really look to put a comprehensive strategic plan together, which is going to look very different than what I think we anticipated initially. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the real immediate critical need that has exploded and that we have responded to. So initially, first March 13th, we said, okay, we have to start serving people outside of our office. So our food pantry is located in the basement of our office, and we do have a door that goes directly outside. So we made a shift, and these are just some pictures to sort of demonstrate how we've done that. The demand in that first week was beyond anything we could comprehend. And so we really needed to look at the demand and the increased supply that created, and then storage. What were we going to do with that additional supply we needed? How are we going to staff it, because we weren't allowing volunteers, and then providing access for those that weren't able to come out to get to the food pantry. So our food insecurity response really was born out of the daily community service providers meeting, which translated into a food access provider meeting weekly to really address what was happening across the city, who's able to stay open, because some of our pantries were actually having to close, some of the pantries in the city. One of those fortuitous events that happened in the fall prior to all of this was that we were able to get funding to purchase a new refrigerated truck. What that did for us was it gave us the ability, obviously, to transport safely a lot of fresh foods and keep things cold, but it left us with another truck that we didn't get rid of right away, which plays a critical role right now in our response. It helps with transporting food. So we work closely with our local Hunger Commission out of the United Way, and that extra truck has been really, really critical in helping to make sure that all the pantries could get the food that they need. Also, we've done mobile pop-ups, and calling mobile pop-ups, we fill the truck up with food, and we go to a location in the city, and we're open for a couple of hours. We advertise that it's happening and work with our community partners and provide access in that part of the city so folks don't have to try to get to us in the center of New Bedford. And then utilizing, you know, the coordinated efforts to troubleshoot any delivery needs. So we do have other partners that are actually doing delivery, and we're providing food for them. One of the challenges was increasing our supply, and we work closely with the Greater Boston Food Bank. And it's been critical, that relationship, in helping to make sure that we have been able to meet the demand. They have a cross dock where they do deliveries for this part of the state here in New Bedford. And we really utilized the relationship we have with the owner of that space. And he has basically given us a ton of space to allow us to store the dry goods so that we can be making bags and keep up with the demand that we have. So we went from serving 1,000 people a month to serving almost 1,500 people a week. And so that increase happened in the space of about 3 weeks. So it's been an incredible ramp up and really putting out fires to try to get here. But we've been able to really increase the deliveries that come down from Boston. And we actually utilized for a while a local trucking company who basically had to shut down as a result of COVID, utilized a contract with them. They gave us a reduced rate, and once a week on Saturdays, they were driving up to the Greater Boston Food Bank to fill up a huge 18-wheeler of supply for probably about 3 months until their business started to pick back up again. So we really tried to pull from all parts of the community to both support some of the areas that took a hit during COVID and also to provide for what we needed in terms of needing food. Local farmers, we've worked closely with local farmers to have fresh food through the summer, and USDA has supported many of those folks with grants to be able to help provide us with free fresh produce. So I touched on the storage space already. We are still located at the crossdock. Our space has become much more sophisticated. We, as similar to CRT, we've applied for every possible piece of grant money we could to try to help support the need for supply and to help with the distribution, and also use some of that money to have extra cold storage so we could safely store frozen goods. We work closely with our sister community action agency in Fall River, Citizens for Citizens, as they're only about 15-20 minutes away from us. And so they actually are storing in that location as well. And we've provided them with support with our truck to make sure that they're able to help support all of the families in their community. And then our staffing, which was a big issue. But we do have the benefit, as I alluded to earlier, of having a youth build program. And we had the benefit of having a youth build program that actually had a group of students that were about to graduate in the spring who needed to do an internship, and they were set up at community locations that were not able to meet that need for OJT. And so they essentially came to us and said, why don't we use the storage location, the warehouse, we call it, to be our internship location. So they jumped in about May and started to organize our extra storage space and create a staging area for them to make bags for us to have enough supply to meet the demand. That worked so well that we decided that we would hire 10 of those students to become summer workers, thinking that the pandemic would be over by August, wishfully thinking that. And as we realized that that wasn't going to be the case, we've actually then put them on as regular employees. They continue to work for us today and play a really critical role, not just in the warehouse piece, but they've taken on helping with the mobile food pantries. They assist in other parts of the agency if we need it, just in terms of having extra hands or assistance with internal projects. And we've used it almost as so Youth Build has a year follow-up, and this is their year follow-up plan. So the Youth Build staff are continuing to support them as well. And it's created an environment for us, so we really started to explore how we can maintain this kind of programming going forward. And it's one of the big wins that we're getting, that we're looking forward to continuing beyond the COVID environment. Our ongoing needs that we've identified was new space to allow for better flow and access to safe indoor and drive-up services. As of right now, we are still serving people outside, and on a day like today where we woke up to snow, and I know how cold it is outside, it's killing me to know that we can't have people inside, but there's just not a safe way to do it in our current location. We are fortunate that in one of our wins, we've just been notified in the last week that we've received funding and are about to sign a P&S for a building that will allow us to move inside, but that's probably not going to be till February. So, but it's new space, and it's going to provide us with some new opportunities for, you know, food security work for this entire community, because we'll be able to collaborate with some of the other pantries to make sure that they can continue and sustain their work. Our long-term staffing plan, as I indicated, while we can utilize Youth Build, they have cycles, and sometimes there are not going to be students that are able to work here. So we're going to have to figure out how we're going to stay staffed up enough to continue to maintain the demand. And then think about how are we going to bring back volunteers eventually? What's our long-term resource plan? Because we've increased in size so much, and while we're fortunate that we have some funds that are going to help us get through the next couple of years, we need to be thinking beyond that. And so I sort of allude to all of those things in the Wins Realized, but we also may have additional funds to get an additional truck that's also cold storage that'll replace that old truck that we keep saying we'll keep using until it breaks down, and it's a workhorse for us right now, but we're hoping it gets us through the holiday season. And so those were some of the things that we really look forward to. So this just gives you an example. Top left is one of our mobile pop-ups. You see in the middle, the bigger picture, that's the 18-wheeler that has been did deliveries for a period of time. In the lower left-hand corner, I thought it would be good to show you, that's our leadership team coming together. They all have on funny glasses, you can't see it, but you know, part of what's made it a successful endeavor has been folks working together and trying to lift each other up as we've all faced a variety of issues ourselves to keep our staff motivated. That's our current newer truck, and that's our food bank coordinator on the left, working with one of the other staff members. One of the things I didn't mention was that as Head Start shut down and USDA stopped paying our kitchen staff at Head Start, those folks transitioned over here because they didn't want to go on layoff, and they actually helped manage our food bank operation for the first until about July, when we had students come back into the Head Start locations. So we repurposed staff to make it all work, and it's worked really well. In addition to the food pantry, our Housing Opportunity Center has increased its staffing. We've been awarded quite a bit of money for rental assistance and doing case management, and we're seeing a huge influx of need, as I'm sure all of you are. And so that aspect of our agency is growing, and it is an area that we had identified as an area of growth that we wanted to do far before the COVID experience. So this has really provided us with a chance to bring on new staff, create more of a case management format, as well as help to disseminate some much needed funds to help keep people in their homes. Some of the response actions that we had was we have now moved to an access online for payroll in our fiscal system. We didn't have that previously. It was on our list of long-term goals, and this opportunity has made that available to us. We're upgrading our phone systems that were several years old and needed to be upgraded and put into a cloud-based system. Our website and our communication tools have been upgraded, and we've changed how we're doing. We've never really done much fundraising, and so we added a fundraising component to it. And then our ongoing response to COVID, you know, has continued. So just really quick, the key takeaways, and I think this is going to mirror what Lena said, keeping communication constant, being open to innovation, really drawing from the staff for ideas on how to continue and to do things maybe a little bit differently. Focusing on solving problems and being decisive is a key piece to all of this. And giving ourselves grace, accepting that we may need to alter course if something doesn't work or requirements change. Collaboration has been key to any of the work that we've been done, and also making sure that folks are taking care of themselves and each other. we're all in this together, and we're working hard to make sure that we keep services moving forward for those that are most at risk and in need of our help. So, so those are our key takeaways, which I'm sure many of you are all of you have in one way or another experienced. And so if you have any questions or and we don't get to it today, feel free to be in touch with me. This is my contact info. I wish you all well, and take care of yourselves and stay safe. Keep up the great work, because you're all doing unbelievable things.
Thank you, Pam. And thank you, Lena, as well. Feel free, folks, to ask any questions or raise your hand, and we will make sure we ask them. I have a couple of questions, one observation, and then I'll ask a question, and then as people ask theirs, we'll ask those. One thing that I sort of observe and listening to both of you is that you realized early on that you needed to react appropriately, but it also looks like you sort of approached it strategically and thoughtfully by asking yourselves key questions. So it was sort of, to me, it seemed like a combination of based on your experience as leaders, applying a sort of a template, but then being as open as possible, being flexible and improvising. And let me ask you this. So what was the very first thing you thought of when the crisis hit in terms of how to address this? What was the first thing that crossed your mind for either of you, both of you?
I could tell you that the first thing I was worried about was technology, hardware. I knew we didn't have enough laptops. And I also knew that we were a little bit ahead of the game in making the decision to think about, or we were thinking about closing. So we took our credit card and we went to Best Buy and Walmart and bought as many laptops as we possibly could before the rush came, so that we counted out. I mean, we were intentional about it. We counted out about how many we thought we would need. And so that's, I have to laugh about it, because I feel like we sort of said, here's the credit card. Okay, go. And just so that we would make sure we had enough hardware and technology to be able to manage people going remotely.
That's interesting, fascinating. Lena, how about you? What was the first thing that you thought of?
So the first thing I thought of is, how are we going to continue to provide services in the community? This is panic time for everybody. And also at the same time, managing fears and panic and high anxiety for our own team, for our own staff in-house first, of course, and then also how do we do that and then continue to provide services? So that's where the leadership team came into play. That's where we had our strategy sessions. Everything was done pretty strategically to the end of making sure that we can continue to provide services, and the most crucial services first, of course, which were Meals on Wheels for seniors, making sure that we bubble wrap our assisted living facility, so seniors and children, taking care of that population, and the mentally behavioral health services for people which were on medication management.
Thank you. We do have a question. Let me ask it. I have a couple more, but let me ask this one from Ellen Ganley. What about accommodating / supporting staff who now have to deal with their own children doing remote learning? How did you become aware of that and then accommodate or support your staff?
We have all of our leadership team working with their individual sets of staff to identify when they're challenged, or how they're managing all of that, and really have encouraged program directors to be flexible with their staff as long as they're able to do what they need to do in the context of a day. It doesn't really necessarily matter if we can be flexible and allow them to either choose to work, or they are eligible for some COVID relief, taking care of their kids if their kids are working remotely from home, which is good. That the FF, it's funny, we joke about the, all these acronyms for the different types of leave and making sure we get it right. But, we do have a number, we don't have a huge number, but we do have some folks that are actually off on the FRCA, I think is the acronym for it. And will be through the end of December. We're actually right now trying to take a look at how are we going to work with them beyond December. because we certainly don't want to put people in a position where they're struggling to make a decision. We want to support them, and we want them to be able to come back when things are in a situation where we're all able to do that. So,
yeah.
Lena.
So for us, it's basically the same thing. I echo what Pam said. We support our staff individually. They work with our HR department. We continue to keep them on staff. Fortunately, we were able to take advantage of the PPE program. I mean, the PPP program. PPP program. Yeah, all these acronyms are killing me. But so to keep people on. So we've done that, and folks are eligible again for unemployment and for different kind of funding opportunities. So we've done, I think, a pretty good job in supporting our staff who have to be home with their kids, other than actually helping them with the virtual learning.
I hear you. So I have a question, and others should feel free to ask one. We are coming to the close of this section, but I was intrigued by both of you talking about the importance of communication early on with your staff and with your external partners. Tell me a little bit about the way you connected. I know, and you both talked about it a little bit, but maybe a little bit more on how you connected with your external partners in this context. And it can be about a particular program or just generally speaking.
So at CRT, we're lucky enough to have a communications director that does an amazing job. And I say that because I know he's online here. So I want to make sure that he heard me say that. But no, with all kidding aside, he really does a great job. We know that it's really, really important to keep our board basically apprised of what's going on, how we're operating. Every time we shifted, we wanted the board to know, because the board is connected with the community and people ask our board members. We communicated to the city of Hartford to make sure that the mayor's office knew what their community action agency was doing and what we continue to operate within the cities, the Hartford area and the Middlesex area. Of course, our parents and putting things on social media, putting things on our Facebook page. We know the importance of communicating out so that people know what we are doing and what we have available to them. We know that firsthand because we've been in this community again for 57 years, and people look to CRT. They look to CRT for help, as they do with all the other community action agencies. So we want to make sure that we communicate effectively to everyone so that everybody is aware of what's going on here.
Yeah, similar experience with us in terms of the community partners specifically. Early on, so New Bedford's a fairly small community, probably not as many service providers to really choose from as Hartford, but there were two or three agencies that really thought we all need to be talking, because we've got to figure out who's doing what, when, and how. And it turned into a daily call initially, partly because it was all of us who ran major agencies trying to figure out what our responses should be and make sure we weren't duplicating effort, as well as it provided support for each other as we were making decisions and kind of getting feedback about what we were supposed to do. Because early on, I mean, I think we've both said it, you know, that things were changing daily, hourly at some point, what we're supposed to do or what we weren't supposed to do, and where could people be and what they, so that group actually really pulled the really large number of the service community. And then our city called together a COVID team, which really invited all the service providers, and we were meeting weekly just to kind of update. And now we're down to every other week, but that daily call was the call that people really sort of problem solved. And so when there was conflict, we even talked about oh, you know, you closed one of your pop-ups and you didn't tell anybody, and we all sent clients there. How do we make sure that doesn't happen again? So really trying to be constructive in terms of, you know, okay, this isn't working. Let's go back to the drawing board and try to do a better job. So that's how we handled the external piece of that.
That's great. Thank you very much. It looks like we're all set with questions from the group and from me. I wanted to thank you both very much for doing this. It really does help to crystallize in some sense, and I think also is helping folks on the line to think about their own approaches So we would very much appreciate being able to use those PowerPoints and send them around, if that's okay with both of you.
Sure.
I wanted to thank you. I wanted to also thank the other panelists, Karen, Carl, and Tricia, Dr. Dean Brown, or Brown Dean, excuse me, for all of this day. But I wanted to thank the participants for being the most excellent Zoomers. We have gotten, I think, pretty good at this. In fact, this crisis, I think, has made us of necessity our own little producers, of content, instant content. So I wanted to thank everybody for your patience and for participating at the same time participating. So it's been really great. What I wanted to do was recap a little bit and then turn it over to our MC for tomorrow, Deb Pullen, to let us know a little bit about what's coming up. But essentially today we started off, I thought, with a very thought-provoking presentation by Linda Brown Dean to sort of continue to help us to understand where we are when it comes to institutional racism. She spoke about many themes, and I certainly will not do it justice, but a couple things that stood out to me were that it's important that we continue to move forward as multiple communities, think of ourselves as multiple communities, that there is this ongoing gap between principle and promise, and that's a tension that we will continually have to address and deal with. But the important thing is that we do address and deal with it. We also heard from her about how important it is for us to really embrace and realize our collective ability to reclaim the conversation about democracy and about our ability to help each other and to open our minds in that direction. So it was very inspiring, and again, much more than what I've said. And this has been recorded, so you'll be able to hear it again. Our discussion, the first panel regarding social justice was also very instructive. A few things that I took from it, from the two agencies that presented, was that we do need to take stock of where we are. And it sounds like folks have been doing that. That was made more important and more acute in this past several months with the death of so many people at the hands of police and others. And so, namely George Floyd and others. And so that, if you will, shocked us into taking stock or adding to what we had been doing. It really did build on the existing commitment to this work, and then caused folks to make plans, take action, and to do that on a consistent basis and a basis that's sustainable both internally and externally. And we just heard about how to work together in a crisis in real time, and it continues. And we can't thank you guys enough for talking about the way that you reacted, the key questions you asked, the way you pulled your teams together, both internally and externally, and your critical takeaways about communications, and also the way that you adapted and improvised, and now are in a position to provide services even more flexibly and better. And we all know that given this experience, given this crisis, that we are going to be doing things different, even after it passes. I think we will be Zooming more, to name one thing, but I do know that we will take with us certain operational lessons and certain lessons about how we work together internally and externally. So let me just take this opportunity to turn things over to Deb Pullen, who will be your MC and moderator tomorrow, to give you a preview of what to expect.
Well, hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thanks for sticking with us all morning and into the early afternoon. I'm really excited about tomorrow because we have a few sessions that are going to build on some of the discussions that started today and will allow us the opportunity to explore some issues a little bit more in depth. We're starting with a session on health disparities. And we have Dr. Takesha Dewan Everett from Health Equity Solutions, Connecticut, who will provide her wisdom and expertise, followed by 2 of our community action leaders who will share some of the work that their community action agencies have done already regarding health disparities, health equity, and improving access to healthcare and quality of life. And I'm excited about that opportunity for all of us to learn from them and potentially replicate some of the work that's been done in some of the other community action agencies in our NECAP sphere. Then we have a session on the digital divide, and we know that Dr. Khalilah Brown-Dean touched on that and then gave us an example in real time of some of the issues that people are experiencing. And so we'll hear from some experts about the digital divide and how community action might be able to play a role in improving access to both computers and internet for our customers. And finally, we have a panel from our national partners, and they'll tell us some of the things that they've been working on over the last couple of months and what they're planning to be working on in the next few months, and they'll leave us with a charge. So I hope everybody comes with with an open mind and thinking through some of what we heard today in preparation for tomorrow. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone right at 9:30 in the morning.
Thanks, Deb. So we'll move to closing at this point. Thanks everybody for being here. I do want to thank again the committee for this. I also want to thank our sponsors, and I want to thank in particular Kelly and Katrina for producing our program today. Thank you all. We've given you 8 extra minutes, so enjoy, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks very much.